My name is Maya, 33 years old. My parents refused to buy me interview clothes. They told me to wear my sister's old suit. I walked into the biggest interview of my life in a suit 2 sizes too big, held together with safety pins. The CEO stared at me for 10 seconds. Then she stood up, took off her own blazer and handed it to me. She said, "I know exactly who you truly are. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth." My morning started when my mother Barbara threw a yellowed, oversized suit at my face. "Put this on, Maya," she ordered. "You are 33 years old. You do not get to waste money on a new outfit." I held the suit up. "Mom, this is Chloe's old suit from 5 years ago. It is 2 sizes too big." My father Richard scoffed, pouring coffee. "You should be grateful your sister is generous. You owe us for dropping out of your master program. You do not get to be picky." I only dropped out because Richard secretly drained my entire tuition fund. He emptied my savings to pay for Chloe's destination wedding in the Bahamas to her lawyer husband Marcus. When I confronted them, Richard simply said family makes sacrifices for the greater good. Their greater good meant I spent the last few years working multiple grueling side hustles while secretly teaching myself investment data analytics late into the night. "You stole my tuition money, Dad," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "I did not drop out. You forced me to." Barbara slammed her hand on the counter. "Stop being so dramatic. Chloe needed a proper start to her marriage. You are single and living in our guest room. Wear the suit and secure a data entry job so you can start paying us rent." I realized arguing was pointless. I grabbed a handful of safety pins and went to the bathroom to fold and pin the excessive fabric at my waist. I prayed the oversized blazer would hide the makeshift tailoring. Arriving at Apex Financial felt like stepping into an entirely different universe. The towering glass walls and pristine marble floors screamed wealth and unimaginable power. I walked toward the front desk, trying to keep my posture straight, despite the ridiculous suit bunching awkwardly around my waist. Suddenly, a loud, familiar voice echoed across the expansive lobby. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." I turned to see Marcus. My African-American brother-in-law stood by the reception desk, wearing a custom-tailored suit and flashing his signature arrogant smile. As a high-powered lawyer, he was clearly here trying to schmooze his way into a lucrative partnership deal with Apex. Marcus looked me up and down, taking in the bunched fabric and the silver glint of a safety pin peeking out from my sleeve. He laughed loudly, drawing the attention of the receptionists and several other polished candidates waiting nearby. "Are you lost, Maya?" he sneered, taking a step closer so the entire lobby could hear him clearly. "This is a major financial firm. If you are here for a data entry temp job, you need to use the service elevator in the back. Do not embarrass me by parading around in front of my future business partners looking like a homeless person." He turned to the lead receptionist and shook his head with an exaggerated sigh. "My apologies. My sister-in-law struggles to grasp basic professional boundaries." I did not give Marcus the satisfaction of a reaction. I simply stared at him for a brief moment, letting his hollow cruelty wash over me without taking root. Then I tightened my iron grip on my leather portfolio, turned my back on his mocking laughter, and walked directly toward the private executive elevators at the far end of the grand lobby. I could feel the judgmental stares burning into my back with every single step I took. My hands were shaking terribly, but I confidently swiped the digital temporary access card I had been securely emailed earlier that morning and rode alone up to the top floor. The elevator doors opened to a sleek, quiet hallway. A poised assistant guided me straight past the standard human resources interview rooms and opened the heavy oak doors of the main executive boardroom. I stepped inside, fully expecting to face a panel of intimidating hiring managers. Instead, the massive room was empty except for one person. Valerie, the legendary female CEO of Apex Financial, sat at the head of the mahogany table. She possessed a formidable presence with sharp, calculating eyes and a demeanor that commanded absolute respect across the entire financial district. Valerie did not say a single word as I walked in. She just stared at me. She looked at my face, Then her intense gaze slowly moved down to the oversized gray suit, the yellowed collar and the safety pins, desperately holding the fabric together at my waist. 10 agonizing seconds passed in pure, heavy silence. I felt my cheeks burn with profound humiliation, fully expecting her to point to the door and tell me I had made a terrible mistake. I prepared myself for the harsh rejection. Instead, Valerie stood up. She unbuttoned her perfectly tailored dark Tom Ford blazer, slipped it off her shoulders, and walked with measured steps around the long table. She stopped right in front of me, holding out the expensive jacket. "Take off that ridiculous thing right now and put this on." "This on," Valerie said, her voice incredibly steady and piercing. I was paralyzed, too stunned to even reach out. "Why?" I whispered softly. Valerie offered a sharp, knowing smile that sent an electrifying shiver straight down my spine. She looked into my eyes and said, "Because I know exactly who you truly are." I slipped my arms into the dark Tom Ford blazer. It fit perfectly instantly, replacing the humiliating oversized suit my parents had forced upon me. The expensive fabric felt like armor. I took a tentative breath, waiting for the punchline or the cruel joke. But Valerie simply walked back to the head of the mahogany table and gestured for me to sit. She did not ask for my resume. She did not ask about the gaps in my employment history. Instead, she unlocked a brushed steel briefcase and slid a thick bound report across the polished wood. The cover bore the Apex Financial logo, alongside a highly classified watermark. I recognized the complex charts immediately. It was the predictive algorithm I had spent the last 6 months building on my battered laptop in my parents' cramped guest room. "You have been operating under the screen name Oracle," Valerie said, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "My cybersecurity team spent 3 weeks trying to trace the IP address of the anonymous developer who accessed our open-source data portal. They finally tracked it to a local coffee shop where a barista confirmed a woman matching your exact description sat in the corner every single day running complex data models." I stared at the report, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had built that algorithm out of sheer frustration. I saw the massive vulnerabilities in Apex offshore portfolio while doing freelance data entry for a third-party vendor. I tried to warn my supervisor, but he dismissed me as a mere temp. So I rewrote the code myself and uploaded the patch anonymously to Apex secure servers. "You saved this company from a $50 million collapse." Valerie continued, leaning forward and interlocking her fingers. "Your patch closed a backdoor vulnerability that our entire risk management department completely missed. When human resources flagged your application for a junior data entry position this morning, I intercepted it. I do not hire geniuses to input spreadsheets, Maya. I hire them to run my departments." I sat frozen, unable to process the magnitude of her words. My own family treated me like a useless burden, a failure who owed them her life just for existing. Yet the most powerful woman in the financial district was looking at me with pure, unadulterated respect. "I want you to head the new risk analytics division," Valerie stated plainly. "I am offering you a senior partner position starting immediately. The compensation package is in that folder, along with a full benefits outline and an unprecedented equity share." Before I could even open the folder to look at the numbers, a loud commotion erupted outside the boardroom. The heavy oak doors flew open, hitting the wall with a loud, violent crack. Marcus barged into the room, his expensive leather briefcase swinging aggressively at his side. A frantic executive assistant trailed behind him, begging him to stop and threatening to call building security. "Valerie, I am so sorry for the interruption," Marcus announced, flashing that bright artificial smile he used to charm his wealthy clients. "But I knew you were in the building, and I had to seize the moment. My law firm is perfectly positioned to handle your new corporate acquisitions. We have the resources, the aggression, and the vision Apex desperately needs to dominate the current fiscal quarter." Valerie did not flinch. She simply raised one perfectly arched eyebrow at his intrusion. Marcus confidently strode toward the table, completely ignoring the assistant who was frantically apologizing from the doorway. He was so focused on pitching his failing law firm that he did not even look at the person sitting across from the CEO. But as he rounded the plush leather chairs, his eyes finally landed on me. The fake charming smile vanished from his face, instantly replaced by a mask of pure unfiltered rage. Maya, he barked, his voice losing all its polished corporate smoothness. What in the world are you doing in here? He looked at the tailored blazer I was wearing, recognizing the luxury brand. Then he looked at the highly classified financial documents spread across the table in front of me. His arrogant mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. You snuck in here. Valerie. He turned back to the CEO, his voice dripping with mock concern. You need to call security right now. This woman is my sister-in-law. She is a desperate, unemployed dropout who clearly snuck into this boardroom to steal corporate secrets. She has been struggling for years and has absolutely no business being anywhere near your sensitive data. I will personally wait with her until the police arrive to press felony charges for corporate espionage. I sat perfectly still. I did not defend myself. I did not shrink down into my chair the way I always did when Marcus bullied me at family dinners. I just watched him, letting him dig his own grave with every arrogant word that spilled from his mouth. Valerie slowly stood up. She smoothed the front of her silk blouse and looked at Marcus with an expression so cold it could have frozen the entire room. She walked over to where I was sitting and placed her hand firmly on my shoulder. A gesture of absolute solidarity that made Marcus stumble backward in sheer confusion. Marcus, Valerie said, her tone dangerously quiet. This woman is not a desperate dropout. She is the brilliant financial strategist who just saved my company $50 million. She is also my newest senior partner. Marcus' mouth opened but no sound came out. The arrogant color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and terrified. He stared at me, then at Valerie, unable to comprehend how the woman he had just publicly humiliated in the lobby was now sitting at the right hand of ultimate power. Valerie turned her gaze down to me. Senior partner Maya, she asked smoothly. This man just aggressively interrupted a highly classified executive meeting to pitch his legal services. Since you will be overseeing our offshore portfolio acquisitions moving forward, do you think Apex should retain your brother-in-law law firm? The silence in the boardroom was absolute. I looked Marcus dead in the eye, taking in his tailored suit, his expensive watch, and the absolute panic sweating through his pores. I thought about the tuition money he and my sister had stolen from me. I thought about the years of humiliation I endured while he paraded his fake wealth around my parents' living room, treating me like the family servant. His firm is a massive liability, I replied, my voice echoing clearly off the glass walls. Their internal management is incredibly sloppy, and they lack the basic professional boundaries required to handle Apex assets. I strongly advise against doing any business with him. Valerie nodded sharply. You heard the senior partner, Valerie said, looking back at Marcus. Get out of my boardroom before I have you escorted out by armed security, and I will personally ensure your firm never does business in this city again. Marcus stood there, utterly humiliated. The slick corporate lawyer persona had been completely stripped away, leaving only a bitter, desperate man facing total ruin. As he turned to leave, he leaned down close to my ear. You are going to regret this, you little parasite, he whispered, his voice trembling with sheer malice. I am going to completely destroy you. He stormed out of the room, slamming the heavy doors behind him. I took a deep breath, feeling a rush of adrenaline and power I had never experienced before. I had finally fought back. I reached for the contract in the folder, ready to sign my name and claim my new life. But before my pen could even touch the paper, my phone vibrated violently against the mahogany table. The screen lit up with a blaring red notification. It was an urgent fraud alert from my bank. The screen lit up with a blaring red notification. It was an urgent fraud alert from my bank. I stared at the flashing text, ignoring the lingering echo of Marcus slamming the boardroom doors. I apologized to my new CEO, promising to sign my employment contract later. Valerie nodded and told me to handle my business. I sprinted out of the executive suite, dialing my bank fraud department. The representative answered immediately, confirming my absolute worst nightmare. A brand new elite credit line had just been opened under my social security number. It was maxed out for exactly $40,000. The representative read off the charges in a sterile voice. 2 first-class tickets to Paris on Air France departing from JFK Airport in less than 2 hours. My blood ran ice cold. Only 2 people had my social security number and the audacity to commit federal identity theft on a Tuesday morning. My parents had memorized my details years ago when they forced me to co-sign a loan for a car they immediately defaulted on. I dialed my mother. Barbara answered over the unmistakable background noise of an airport terminal departures hall. Before I could demand an explanation, Barbara casually admitted to the crime with a cheerful laugh. She told me not to overreact because Marcus and Chloe desperately needed a luxury anniversary trip to Paris. She had the nerve to tell me I should be thanking them for handling the booking logistics, so I did not have to worry about buying my sister a gift. I hung up the phone and ran to my car. The adrenaline from my boardroom victory against Marcus instantly morphed into a blind raging determination. I had exactly 45 minutes before their flight began boarding. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, speeding down the expressway toward JFK Airport. My parents had financially abused me my entire life, treating my bank accounts like their personal slush funds. They had drained my master degree tuition fund to pay for Chloe's extravagant destination wedding, leaving me with crushing debt. I was not going to let them steal my future a second time. I parked illegally at the terminal and sprinted through the sliding glass doors. Using my newly minted Apex Financial Corporate Platinum card, I bypassed the regular security lines and gained immediate access to the exclusive Air France VIP lounge. I spotted them sitting in a plush velvet booth near the panoramic windows, acting like royalty. Richard was aggressively swirling scotch in a crystal glass. Barbara was delicately eating overpriced imported macaroons. Chloe was adjusting her massive designer sunglasses, while Marcus leaned in close, posing for a selfie. Marcus had clearly rushed straight from his humiliating defeat at the Apex boardroom to the airport, omitting his massive professional failure from his eager wife and my oblivious parents. I marched directly over to their booth and slammed my hand down flat on their table. The impact rattled the crystal glasses and spilled Richard's scotch across the polished wood. I demanded they cancel the fraudulent credit card transaction immediately. Richard stood up, his face instantly turning a deep, furious shade of purple. He did not offer a single word of apology. Instead, he loudly declared right there in the quiet luxury lounge that since he and Barbara had put a roof over my head for my entire childhood, my credit score legally and morally belonged to the family. He shouted that I was an ungrateful child who owed them every single cent I would ever earn. Chloe slammed her phone down onto the table and let out an exaggerated theatrical whine. She glared at me with pure disgust, demanding I lower my voice because I was ruining the flawless aesthetic of her anniversary vlog. She complained that my poverty mindset was destroying her perfectly curated social media presence. Barbara chimed in right on cue, adjusting her pearl necklace and telling me to stop being so incredibly selfish. She sneered that since I just scored some temp job at Apex, I could easily pay off a $40,000 debt. She told me to consider it a late wedding gift since I had been too broke to buy them a gift. I looked at the 4 of them, clearly seeing their toxic entitlement laid bare in the bright airport lighting. I refused to back down. I pulled out my phone and dialed the bank fraud department again. I pressed the speakerphone button and turned the volume all the way up so my family could hear every single word. I loudly stated to the bank investigator that I was the victim of familial identity theft, and the $40,000 charge for the Air France tickets was completely unauthorized and fraudulent. The bank representative immediately locked the account and initiated a hard chargeback, voiding the transaction on the spot. Less than a minute later, a panicked gate agent approached our booth. She regretfully informed Marcus and Chloe that their first-class tickets had just been flagged as fraudulent and completely invalidated by the banking system. They were not going to Paris. Chloe completely lost her mind. She screamed at the terrified gate agent, then turned her absolute wrath directly on me. Her perfectly contoured face contorted with pure, unfiltered hatred. She picked up her oversized designer leather tote bag and hurled it directly at my head with all her strength. I ducked just in time. The leather bag missed my face and smashed violently into the solid marble pillar behind me. The golden clasp shattered on impact. The contents of the bag exploded outward, raining down across the pristine floor. Expensive makeup compacts shattered into colorful dust, but something else caught my eye. Dozens of thick legal envelopes stamped with bright red urgent warnings spilled out absolutely everywhere. I reached down and picked one up from the floor. It was a final notice of foreclosure for Marcus and Chloe brand new $1 million mansion. I stared at the thick red lettering on the document in my hand. Final notice of foreclosure. The pristine illusion of Marcus and Chloe absolute perfection shattered right there on the VIP lounge floor. I looked up. Marcus was scrambling desperately on his hands and knees trying to sweep the documents back into the ruined designer bag. The slick, highly successful corporate lawyer routine was dead. Through his frantic, panicked muttering, the ugly truth finally spilled out. His boutique law firm was entirely bankrupt. He had not won a single corporate settlement in over 2 years. Instead, he had been secretly draining their joint accounts to feed a catastrophic offshore gambling addiction. Chloe stood frozen, her face entirely drained of color. She was not crying because her husband had lied to her. She was crying because she was about to lose the massive mansion she used as a primary background for her daily social media posts. My mother Barbara did not express a single ounce of shock or disappointment toward Marcus. Instead, she immediately spun around and locked her terrifying gaze on me. "Well, Maya," she snapped, her voice echoing through the quiet lounge. "This is actually perfect timing. You just secured a massive senior partner position at Apex Financial. I am sure your signing bonus alone is astronomical. You are going to wire the funds to clear Chloe mortgage arrears immediately." I stared at the woman who raised me, astounded by her delusional entitlement. "You expect me to pay off $1 million house for a sister who just threw a bag at my head?" I asked, my voice echoing with pure disbelief. "You expect me to bail out a man who publicly humiliated me in my corporate lobby just hours ago?" Richard stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Family protects family. Maya," he barked loudly. "Chloe is a mother. She needs a stable home. You are just a single career woman who has absolutely no real responsibilities. You owe us this." I looked at the three of them standing united in their shared toxicity. "I will never give you a single cent," I stated firmly, squaring my shoulders. "I am done funding your delusions. I am done letting you treat me like a disposable cash machine. You can figure out your own toxic mess." Instead of backing down, Marcus suddenly stopped scrambling on the floor. He slowly stood up, brushing the dust off his knees. The sheer panic that had consumed him just seconds ago vanished completely. A dark, twisted smile stretched across his face. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a folder. He pulled a heavy legal contract from the folder and shoved it directly into my chest. "You really think you have a choice, Maya?" He sneered, his voice dripping with pure arrogance. "You think I would let a desperate dropout suddenly hold all the power?" I looked down at the document. My stomach plummeted. It was a commercial bridge loan agreement from Manhattan Central Bank for exactly $500,000. I scanned the bottom of the signature page. Right there on the guarantor line was my name. It was my exact signature, flawlessly executed. "I never signed this," I whispered. Marcus laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Of course you did not sign it," he gloated. "But I am a brilliant lawyer, Maya. I know exactly how to draft airtight contracts, and I know exactly how to trace a signature from the student loan documents your parents provided me. You are legally bound as the primary guarantor on this $500,000 loan. I finalized the paperwork last week, knowing Apex was about to cut you a check for your algorithm." I stared at the fraudulent document, realizing the absolute severity of the trap he had laid. "If he defaults on this loan, the bank will automatically seize your accounts," Marcus sneered. "And guess what, Maya? I am defaulting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. The bank is going to instantly garnish your Apex signing bonus, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it." I looked at the banking officer's signature authorizing the fraudulent loan. The name printed at the bottom was Bradley Jenkins. I remembered that name immediately. Bradley Jenkins was the former fraternity president of the exact same college Marcus had attended. "You submitted a forged document to your old fraternity brother," I stated, my voice deadly calm. Marcus threw his head back and laughed loudly. "Welcome to the real world, Maya," he mocked. "The banking system is a boys' club. Bradley processed the loan without asking a single question because brothers protect brothers. By the time you hire a lawyer and try to drag this through the courts, The bank will have already seized your Apex funds to cover my debt. You lose, Maya. You always lose. Chloe crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk returning. Barbara nodded approvingly at Marcus, ignoring that her son-in-law had just committed federal fraud against her own daughter. You should have just offered to pay the mortgage, Barbara scolded softly. Now you have to learn things the hard way. They all looked at me, fully expecting me to break down crying. They expected me to surrender. Instead, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I did not scream or panic. I calmly scrolled through my new Apex corporate contact list. Marcus was incredibly smug about his low-level branch manager fraternity brother. But Marcus did not know that the regional director of Manhattan Central Bank, the man who controlled every single branch on the entire East Coast, had just transferred his massive private wealth portfolio to Apex Financial that exact morning. He was officially my newest private client. I maintained unbroken eye contact with Marcus as my fingers typed a rapid, secure text message directly to the regional director personal cell phone. I hit send, locked my phone screen tightly in my right hand, and smiled. The lobby of Manhattan's Central Bank smelled of expensive floor wax and old-fashioned intimidation. Marcus walked in with the gait of a man who owned the building. His suit jacket unbuttoned, his eyes scanning the space for his fraternity brother Bradley. Chloe clung to his arm, her eyes puffy from her tantrum, still radiating a sense of entitlement that was completely detached from the foreclosure notices currently tucked into her clutch. They bypassed the standard customer service queue and headed straight for the glass-walled office of the branch manager. They expected a quick signature, a stack of funds, and a clean escape from the disaster they had created. Instead, the door was already open. I was seated in the guest chair, my posture relaxed, while the regional director of Manhattan Central Bank sat across from me. He was a man named Arthur Sterling, a formidable figure in finance, and one of my most recent high-net-worth clients at Apex Financial. The look on Marcus's face when he saw Arthur was nothing short of cinematic. His arrogant stride faltered, his shoulders slumped, and the color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost. He tried to turn to pull Chloe away and retreat into the safety of the lobby, but Bradley, the branch manager, was already standing at the door. Bradley was sweating profusely, his tie looking tight enough to cut off his circulation. He clearly had no idea that I had spent the last 20 minutes walking Arthur through the digital audit logs of the bridge loan application. I had provided Apex's enterprise-level forensics report, which mapped the exact IP address and keystroke metadata used to bypass the bank's security protocols. It was a digital fingerprint that tied the forgery directly to the unsecured laptop currently sitting in Marcus's briefcase. Arthur Sterling did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply gestured to the folder of evidence on his desk. He explained with the chilling precision of a man who managed billions that the bank had completed its internal investigation. He informed Marcus that the application was not only nullified, but had been flagged for the district attorney's office as a clear-cut case of felony wire fraud and identity theft. Bradley, the fraternity brother, didn't even get a chance to speak. Arthur terminated his employment on the spot, citing a complete breach of fiduciary duty and illegal collaboration with a fraudulent applicant. Marcus tried to stammer a defense, citing legal misunderstanding and clerical error, but his voice was thin and brittle. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic fear. I just stared back, my face an impenetrable mask of professional indifference. The police were already in the lobby, called by Arthur as a standard protocol for institutional fraud. Marcus and Chloe were escorted out of the bank by uniformed officers, their reputations disintegrating in real time as they were led through the busy financial district lobby. I stayed behind for a few minutes to thank Arthur for his efficiency. He assured me that Apex Financial valued our partnership and that he would personally ensure the criminal referral was processed within the hour. I walked out of the bank feeling like a different person. I had destroyed the leverage Marcus thought he had, and I had secured my position within the financial establishment. But the air of victory was short-lived. As I stepped out into the parking lot toward my car, a shadow fell across the pavement. Marcus was waiting for me. He had somehow slipped away from the police detail during the chaos of the bank's lobby. He looked absolutely rabid, his expensive suit disheveled, his eyes wild with the frantic energy of a cornered predator. He did not try to hide his hatred anymore. He didn't even try to pretend he was a lawyer. He grabbed my arm, forcing me to spin around, and jammed a phone screen into my face. A video was playing. It was a high-resolution, incredibly realistic deep fake of me in a dark, grimy basement hunched over a mirror with white powder and a razor blade. The lighting was perfect, the facial expressions were mine, and the audio had been carefully layered to sound like I was boasting about corporate espionage. "You think you're so smart with your algorithms and your fancy partners?" Marcus hissed, his grip bruising. "I have spent the last 3 days working with a professional AI firm. If I go down for fraud, I am taking you with me. This video goes to the HR director at Apex Financial in 5 minutes. By tomorrow, you will be blacklisted from every single financial firm in the country. You will be a pariah." I looked at the video, then at him, and I began to laugh. It was a genuine, surprised laugh. Marcus seemed baffled by my reaction, his jaw dropping as he waited for me to beg. "You really are an amateur, Marcus," I said, pulling my arm away with a sharp tug. "I had Apex's cybersecurity team run a full sweep of your digital footprint the second you started threatening me. We know about the AI firm you hired. We know about the offshore server you used to host the rendering. We've already submitted a cease and desist order to the service provider, and we have the metadata that proves this file was created using your personal credentials and your credit card. You haven't just committed fraud, you've committed a textbook case of digital defamation. If you upload that video, you won't just be going to jail for the loan fraud. You'll be spending the next decade in federal prison for cyberstalking and malicious destruction of professional reputation." Marcus looked like he had been struck. He stared at his phone, then at me, the arrogance finally replaced by a hollow, shuddering realization of his own utter incompetence. He didn't know what to do next. He had no more cards to play. He had no more lies to spin. But just as he started to back away, a silver Mercedes screeching into the parking lot cut our standoff short. The driver's door flew open and Barbara stepped out. She looked at Marcus, then at me, her eyes darting around the lot as if she were looking for an audience. She saw the police cars idling near the bank entrance and knew the game was up. She didn't look at me with hate. She looked at me with the same cold, manipulative calculation she had used her entire life. She started breathing heavily, her face turning a deep, unnatural shade of red. She clutched her chest with both hands, her fingernails digging into the expensive fabric of her coat. She stumbled forward, gasping for air, her eyes rolling back as she dropped to the concrete. She let out a guttural, terrifying scream that pierced the parking lot. She lay there writhing, pointing an accusing, trembling finger directly at me, as she shrieked that I had given her a heart attack and was trying to kill her. The blare of the ambulance sirens shattered the midday traffic as we arrived at Manhattan General Hospital. I had followed the paramedics in my own car, not out of concern for my mother, but because I knew exactly how my family operated. They needed an audience, and they needed a villain. I barely stepped foot into the stark white emergency room waiting area before Richard charged at me. He had rushed over from the airport, abandoning his scotch, to play the role of the devastated patriarch. Chloe was right behind him, wiping away non-existent tears while covertly checking her reflection in the glass doors. "Look what you did!" Richard bellowed, his voice carrying across the crowded waiting room. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger at my chest. "Your mother is lying in a hospital bed fighting for her life because you could not just be a decent daughter and help your sister. You stressed her into a massive cardiac event, Maya. You are a monster." I crossed my arms, refusing to shrink away. "She drove to my bank to ambush me, Richard," I stated coldly. "I did not force her to throw a theatrical tantrum on the concrete." Chloe lunged forward, grabbing my forearm with her manicured claws. "She is dying!" "Maya!" she shrieked loudly, making sure the nurses at the triage desk were watching. "The doctor said she needs an immediate VIP cardiac suite and emergency bypass preparation. The hospital requires a $20,000 admission fee up front for the out-of-network specialist. Pay it right now. Clear the charge on your fancy new corporate card and prove you are not the sociopath who put her in here." I looked down at Chloe, gripping my arm, and then up at Richard, holding out his hand expectantly. A cold wave of absolute clarity washed over me. They were not panicked, they were calculating. I remembered this exact script. 3 years ago, Richard stood in my cramped apartment sobbing that his liver was failing and he needed $15,000 for experimental treatments. My sweet Aunt Susan had drained her modest retirement account to write him a check. The second that check cleared, Richard's miraculous liver failure cured itself and he bought a brand new luxury speedboat. 2 years before that, he convinced his own brother to pay for a life-saving neck surgery that miraculously turned out to be a cosmetic hair transplant in Miami. I knew his playbook. He manufactured a crisis, escalated the panic, and preyed on the basic human decency of his targets. I am not Aunt Susan, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I am not wiring you 20 grand for a failing heart that will miraculously cure itself the second my money hits your account. Richard's face twisted into an ugly snarl. You ungrateful parasite, he spat, stepping so close I could smell the stale airport alcohol on his breath. Your mother is dying and you are hoarding your money. I will tell everyone in this family that you killed her. I will tell the press. I will call your new boss at Apex and tell them they hired a murderer. Do not bother, I replied smoothly, stepping around his bulky frame. I will handle the billing directly with the attending physician. I ignored their sudden frantic shouts for me to come back and marched straight to the central nurses' station. My corporate attire and unyielding posture parted the sea of waiting patients. I flashed my ID to the triage nurse and demanded to speak with the doctor overseeing Barbara risk assessment. A young, weary-looking physician named Dr. Eris stepped out from behind a glass partition holding a digital chart. I am Barbara's daughter, I said, keeping my tone completely professional. My father and sister are in the lobby claiming she requires a $20,000 out-of-network cardiac bypass. I need you to verify her exact medical status before I authorize a single cent. Dr. Eris looked at me, then looked down at his digital tablet with a profound expression of confusion. Bypass surgery, he asked, his brow furrowing in genuine bewilderment. Ma'am, your mother is not having a heart attack. Her EKG is completely clear. Her blood panels are perfect. She is suffering from an acute episode of acid reflux exacerbated by mild anxiety and what appears to be an excessive amount of airport lounge champagne. We gave her a generic antacid tablet. She is currently sitting up in bed demanding we order her a catered lunch from a specific Italian restaurant downtown. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. So no emergency surgery, I confirmed. Absolutely not, Dr. Eris replied, shaking his head. She is perfectly healthy. The total charge for this visit will be your standard emergency room copay. We are discharging her in 10 minutes. I thanked the doctor and turned on my heel, walking purposefully down the corridor toward Bay 4. I yanked the privacy curtain back with one swift motion. Barbara was sitting propped up against the hospital pillows, scrolling rapidly through an online shopping catalog on her phone. Richard and Chloe were already inside the room, huddled near the bed, furiously whispering about how to maximize the cash extraction. They all froze the second they saw me standing in the doorway. Acid reflux, Mom, I asked, my voice dripping with pure, unfiltered disdain. You threw yourself onto a concrete parking lot screaming that I was killing you over some spicy food and a bad case of indigestion. Barbara immediately dropped her phone and clutched her chest, gasping theatrically. It felt like a heart attack, she wailed, trying to force a tear. The pain was unbearable, Maya. You do not understand what you are doing to this family. I understand exactly what you are doing, I shot back, staring down my father and sister. You wanted $20,000 for a VIP suite that does not exist. You tried to extort me using a fake medical emergency because Marcus' fraud scheme failed at the bank. You are all absolutely pathetic. I did not wait for their pathetic excuses. I turned away in total disgust, letting the heavy privacy curtain snap shut behind me. I needed to get out of this toxic environment and get to the Apex Financial building to formally sign my senior partner contract. I reached down to grab my car keys from my leather tote bag. My fingers brushed against empty air. I looked down. The heavy brass zipper of my purse had been pulled completely open. I stopped dead in my tracks, the harsh hospital lights buzzing above my head. I frantically dug my hands into the bag, tearing past my wallet and my makeup case. The interior side pocket was unzipped. My breath caught in my throat. My level 10 security clearance badge, the heavily encrypted metallic keycard Valerie had handed me, that granted unrestricted physical and digital access to the Apex Financial offshore data servers was gone. My mind flashed back to the chaotic waiting room. I remembered Chloe lunging at me. I remembered her sharp manicured claws gripping my forearm, her body pressing aggressively against my side while she screamed about VIP suites and emergency surgery. It had not been a dramatic emotional outburst. It had been a highly calculated physical distraction. While Richard yelled in my face demanding $20,000, Chloe had smoothly unzipped my bag and stolen the highest level security clearance in the entire financial district. She did not just want to ruin my day. She was planning to hand that badge over to Marcus so he could infiltrate the Apex network. I spun around staring at the closed curtain of Bay 4, my blood turning to pure ice as the true scale of their sabotage finally hit me. I did not waste a single second confronting Richard or pulling back that curtain to scream at my mother. I turned on my heel and sprinted down the hospital corridor, ignoring the startled shouts of the nursing staff. My phone was already in my hand, my thumbs flying across the screen to access the Apex Financial Remote Security application. The digital log loaded instantly and showed a terrifying reality. My badge had just swiped into the underground parking garage of the Apex building. Chloe had not handed the card over to Marcus to let him do the dirty work. She was executing the theft herself. I shoved my way through the sliding emergency room doors and broke into a dead run toward my car. Marcus was too much of a coward to commit corporate espionage in broad daylight, but Chloe possessed a lethal combination of desperation and absolute delusion. I knew exactly what she was targeting. Last week, during a tense family dinner, I had foolishly mentioned the proprietary trading algorithm I had built, the exact code that secured my senior partner position. I had explained how rival firms would pay tens of millions for a glimpse of the architecture. Chloe had listened, her eyes gleaming with greed while she complained about her mortgage. She planned to bypass the executive server room protocols, download the algorithm onto a physical drive, and sell it directly to a competitor to instantly erase Marcus and his massive offshore gambling debts. I drove like a madwoman, weaving through Manhattan traffic, ignoring honking horns and yellow lights. My tires screeched as I took corners at reckless speeds. My mind raced through the security layouts of the Apex building. The executive servers required a physical badge swipe and a secondary biometric scan, but Chloe and I were sisters. We shared identical bone structure and enough facial similarity that a low-tier biometric scanner might register a false positive if she adjusted the lighting and wore my glasses. I slammed my car into a loading zone outside the towering glass facade of the Apex building, threw the keys at a startled valet, and sprinted through the revolving doors without looking back. The main lobby of Apex Financial was a cavernous expanse of Italian marble and reinforced glass designed to intimidate visitors and project absolute power. Right there, standing in front of the secure elevator banks, was Chloe. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors, clutching a massive leather tote bag, and frantically swiping my level 10 security badge against the card reader. A red error light kept flashing, denying her entry. She was violently hitting the keypad, muttering curses under her breath, completely oblivious to the security cameras tracking her every single move. "Chloe!" I shouted, my voice echoing sharply off the high marble ceilings. She spun around, dropping my security badge onto the polished floor. When she saw me sprinting toward her, the sheer panic in her eyes instantly morphed into feral rage. She did not freeze or surrender. She lunged at me with a guttural scream. "Give me the access code," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You owe me this, Maya!" Before I could brace myself, she grabbed my shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into my skin. She slashed downward, her claws tearing through the fabric of my silk blouse and leaving burning, bleeding scratches down my forearm. "You stole my life!" she shrieked violently, shaking me as I struggled to push her away. "You get the massive salary and the perfect career while I am about to lose my mansion and my status. You are a selfish, hoarding bitch, and I am taking what belongs to me to save my family." The physical altercation instantly drew the attention of the Apex security detail. 4 heavily armed guards in dark suits rushed across the lobby, boots pounding against the marble as they surrounded us. One guard grabbed Chloe by the waist, pulling her away from me while she thrashed and kicked, her designer heels scraping aggressively against the floor. "Ma'am, are you injured?" the lead guard asked, placing his imposing frame firmly between me and my deranged sister. I looked down at my bleeding arm, watching the red drops stain my torn sleeve, and then looked up at Chloe, who was panting heavily, her hair a wild mess around her flushed face. "Arrest her immediately," the guard ordered, reaching for his shoulder radio to dispatch law enforcement. "Call the police and lock down the building." "Wait," I commanded, holding up my uninjured hand. I wiped a drop of blood from my wrist and stared at Chloe, letting the silence stretch. "You actually thought you could walk into a high-level financial institution, steal proprietary code, and sell it on the black market like a petty thief?" Chloe let out a breathless, manic laugh, her eyes wild with a terrifying overconfidence. "You think you won, Maya?" she sneered, struggling fruitlessly against the guard's iron grip. "You think you are so brilliant and untouchable. My buyer is already here. He is waiting in the guest lounge right now. Marcus set up the deal yesterday afternoon. He is a senior partner at a rival firm, and he brought a certified cashier check for $5 million. I am walking out of here rich, and you are going to be investigated for losing your security credentials." I did not panic. I did not flinch. I simply turned my head toward the VIP guest lounge situated at the far end of the lobby. A tall man wearing a sharp-tailored suit and dark sunglasses stepped out from the shadows of the alcove. He held a sleek leather briefcase in one hand and walked with deliberate, measured steps. Chloe grinned triumphantly as the man approached our circle, her posture radiating arrogant victory. "See, Maya," she gloated, her voice dripping with spite. "The deal is done. You lose again." The man stopped 2 feet away from us. He did not look at Chloe. He looked directly at me and gave a curt professional nod, acknowledging my presence. Then he slowly reached up and removed his sunglasses, revealing cold, calculating eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open with a snap. A silver badge caught the overhead lobby lights, gleaming brightly in the tense air. He was not a rival corporate lawyer. "My name is Special Agent Vance," he stated, his voice echoing clearly across the silent marble lobby. "I am with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Marcus and Chloe Blackwood, you have just walked directly into a federal sting operation." Chloe's smug grin dissolved into a mask of pure horror as Special Agent Vance flashed his silver SEC badge under the bright lobby lights. The heavily armed Apex security guards immediately moved in, firmly securing Chloe's arms behind her back. She dropped the massive leather tote bag, the stolen security badge clattering loudly against the polished marble floor. Vance calmly instructed the guards to move the suspect to a secure holding room for federal processing. Chloe did not scream this time. She walked away in a state of catatonic shock, her designer sunglasses askew, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of her actions. The holding room was a stark, windowless square of white walls and stainless steel, located in the secure sub-basement of the Apex building. I stood near the door with my arms crossed, watching as Chloe paced frantically back and forth. Her previous bravado was entirely gone, replaced by hyperventilating panic and muttered prayers. Less than 20 minutes later, the heavy steel door slammed open. Marcus marched in, wielding his rapidly expiring bar credentials like a shield to gain entry. Richard and Barbara flanked him, looking like a mobilized strike force. I noted instantly that Barbara was walking perfectly fine, her supposedly failing heart and near-death parking lot experience entirely forgotten the moment her favorite daughter faced federal prison. Richard did not even acknowledge Special Agent Vance, standing quietly in the corner of the room. He stomped directly toward me, his face a terrifying shade of purple. "You are going to fix this right now," Maya, Richard commanded, jabbing his thick finger inches from my face. "You are going to tell this federal agent that you authorized Chloe to take that badge. You will say this was a severe miscommunication about a corporate file transfer and demand they release your sister immediately." I stared at him, absolutely marveling at the boundless depths of his delusion. "You want me to confess to corporate espionage and federal wire fraud to cover up her crime?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly off the sterile walls. Barbara stepped forward, grabbing my wrist with a desperate, bruising grip. "Chloe is a mother, Maya," Barbara hissed, her eyes wide and manic. "She has a family to protect. She has a reputation to uphold in our community. You are single. You are just a career woman with absolutely nothing to lose." A few years in a minimum security white-collar facility will not ruin your life, but it will completely destroy hers. You owe your sister this sacrifice. You owe this family. I yanked my arm out of Barbara's grip, stepping back from the toxic trio. I owe her absolutely nothing, I stated firmly, my voice razor-sharp and unyielding. Chloe made her choice when she unzipped my bag, and you all made your choices when you tried to extort me at the hospital. I am not taking the fall for your collective felony. You can rot. Marcus let out a dark, victorious chuckle. He smoothed his tie, adjusted his suit jacket, and turned away from me to face Special Agent Vance. My client Chloe Blackwood is the victim of a highly sophisticated setup, Marcus declared smoothly, pulling a sleek silver tablet from his leather briefcase. He tapped the screen a few times and handed it confidently to the federal agent. Maya Wilson is the actual mastermind of this theft. She realized her proprietary algorithm was inherently flawed and knew she was about to be fired by Apex Financial. She orchestrated this entire extraction, forcing my wife to act as an unwitting courier under the threat of blackmail. I looked at the glowing screen. It was an email chain ostensibly sent from my secure Apex corporate account to Chloe, detailing a step-by-step plan to steal the algorithm and split the black market profits with a rival firm. The timestamps were from earlier that morning. Agent Vance scrolled through the fabricated emails, his expression hardening into a mask of professional severity. He looked up at me, his eyes cold and evaluating. "These headers look incredibly legitimate." Ms. Wilson Vance stated, his tone shifting instantly from ally to investigator. "Given your high-level security access, your proximity to the stolen data, and the extreme severity of these allegations, I have no choice but to initiate an immediate freeze on all your Apex financial accounts and your personal assets pending a full federal inquiry." Chloe let out a loud, relieved breath, shooting me a malicious, triumphant smirk. Richard clapped Marcus heavily on the back, muttering his approval, while Barbara crossed her arms with a satisfied nod. They thought they had won. They thought their fabricated reality was enough to crush me one final time. I did not get a chance to defend myself. The heavy steel door of the holding room hissed open, sliding smoothly into the reinforced wall. Valerie, the CEO of Apex Financial, strode into the room. She wore a tailored crimson suit and an expression that could cut glass. Flanking her were two senior IT forensic analysts pushing a mobile digital projection cart. "Nobody is freezing Maya's accounts," Valerie announced, her voice commanding absolute, unquestionable authority. She did not look at Marcus, Richard, or Barbara. She looked directly at Agent Vance. "We monitor every single byte of data that enters or exits this building, and we protect our senior partners." Valerie snapped her fingers. The IT team instantly powered up the projector, casting a massive high-definition live feed against the blank white wall of the holding room. Lines of complex code and IP routing logs scrolled rapidly across the projected screen, eventually halting and highlighting a glaring string of bright red text. "Those emails were completely fabricated," Agent Vance, Valerie stated, pointing sharply at the glowing red data. "And they were not generated this morning. As you can clearly see from our network firewall timestamp, those emails were manufactured, backdated, and injected into our server traffic exactly 30 minutes ago." Valerie turned slowly, fixing her predatory, unforgiving gaze on my father. "And the IP address used to launch that spoofing attack traces directly back to a residential router registered to Richard Wilson." The silence in the holding room was absolute. Richard stared at the projected IP address, his jaw working uselessly, as if he had forgotten how to speak. The realization that his own digital footprint was glowing in neon red on an enterprise-level forensic projection screen shattered his arrogant facade entirely. He spun around, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple, and grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his expensive Italian suit. "You used my home network!" Richard bellowed, spit flying from his lips as he violently shoved his son-in-law backward. "You told me you had secured offshore servers. You told me this operation was entirely untraceable. You told me the encryption was military grade." Marcus shoved Richard off with equal violence, his slick corporate lawyer persona completely disintegrating. "It would have been untraceable if your idiot daughter had not messed up the secondary authentication protocol," Marcus screamed back, pointing a shaking finger at Chloe. "She was supposed to be in and out of the lobby in 2 minutes flat. She panicked. She decided to throw a physical temper tantrum in front of a dozen armed guards. She dragged my entire operation into the mud because she cannot control her emotions. I panicked! Chloe shrieked, her voice reaching a hysterical, ear-piercing pitch. You gave me a forged security badge that triggered a silent alarm the exact second I scanned it at the turnstile. You set me up to take the fall for your massive gambling debts. You are bankrupt and you tried to use me as your sacrificial lamb. The flawless, unified front of the Blackwood and Wilson alliance completely crumbled right in front of my eyes. They descended into a vicious, snarling dogfight, screaming over each other in the center of the holding room. In their desperate attempts to shift the blame, they eagerly offered up explicit details of their own conspiracy to the federal agent standing quietly in the corner. Marcus openly admitted to drafting the fraudulent emails claiming Richard had authorized the text. Richard swore he only provided the unsecured internet connection because Marcus had threatened to drag Chloe into federal court for complicity. They were doing the SEC's job for them, laying out a neat, tightly wrapped verbal confession for the recording devices I knew Apex had embedded in the ceiling. Barbara watched her husband and son-in-law tear each other apart. The reality of federal prison finally breached her thick skull, destroying decades of calculated manipulation. She dropped her designer handbag. She fell to her knees on the cold tile floor. Real tears, ugly and terrified, streamed down her face, ruining her expensive cosmetics. She crawled toward me, her hands grabbing desperately at the hem of my skirt. Maya, she sobbed, her voice a pathetic, wavering whine that echoed off the stainless steel walls. Maya, please, you have to stop this. You have to hire us a defense lawyer. You have that massive Apex signing bonus. You have millions of dollars now. Hire Harrison and Associates. They are the best defense attorneys in the financial district. Keep your father out of a federal penitentiary. Keep your sister out of a jail cell. Please, Maya, we are your family. You cannot just stand there and watch us lose everything. I looked down at the woman who had spent 30 years making me feel like an unwanted burden. I looked at the woman who had faked a heart attack in a parking lot just hours ago to extort me. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no lingering childhood desire for her approval. I felt only the cold, sterile air of the Apex holding room. I took a deliberate step back, forcing Barbara's hands to slip off my skirt. I will not give you a single cent, I stated firmly, my voice cutting through the chaotic room like a scalpel. I will not pay for your high-powered defense attorneys. I will not post your bail. I will not leverage my corporate assets to save you. You are going to face the exact unmitigated consequences of your own fraudulent actions. I turned my back on my sobbing mother and looked directly at Special Agent Vance. Agent Vance, as the primary victim of this targeted conspiracy, I am officially pressing full charges. I am citing identity theft, corporate espionage, digital harassment, and federal wire fraud. I want them prosecuted to the absolute fullest extent of the law. Agent Vance nodded sharply, his face set in grim determination. He signaled to the Apex security guards and two additional federal agents, who had just stepped silently through the sliding steel doors. Marcus Blackwood, Chloe Blackwood, Richard Wilson. You are all under arrest for conspiracy to commit corporate espionage and federal wire fraud. The harsh metallic click of handcuffs echoed loudly in the small room. The federal agents moved in swiftly, securing Chloe first. She wailed a high-pitched sound of absolute defeat as her arms were pulled behind her back. Marcus went entirely limp. His eyes glazed over in shock, offering zero physical resistance as the heavy steel cuffs snapped tightly around his wrists. But Richard refused to surrender his power quietly. As a federal agent reached for his arm, Richard violently jerked away, backing himself hard against the white wall. His eyes darted frantically around the room. He was a man who had aggressively controlled every narrative his entire life, and he could not accept that he had zero leverage remaining. He dug his hand deep into his trouser pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished brass key attached to a weathered leather strap. He held it up high, wielding it like a weapon. "You think you hold all the cards?" Maya, Richard sneered, his chest heaving with exertion. "You think you can just lock your family away and walk back to your perfect new executive life? You are forgetting something very important." I recognized the brass key instantly. My stomach gave a brief involuntary flutter. It was the master key to the secure safe deposit box at Manhattan Central Bank. That specific box held the only item I truly cared about from my entire childhood. It held my late grandfather's vintage Patek Philippe watch. My grandfather was the only person in my family who had ever supported my early interest in mathematics and coding. When he passed away, Richard had immediately seized the watch, locking it away in the bank vault, and claiming he was holding it in trust until I earned the right to wear it. It was his ultimate tool of emotional control dangled in front of me for years to enforce my obedience. I still hold the key to the vault. Maya, Richard barked a desperate, ugly smirk, stretching across his sweating face. I hold the only piece of your beloved grandfather you have left in this world. You will drop these federal charges right now. You will tell this agent that this entire situation was a massive corporate misunderstanding. If you do not comply the exact second I make bail, I am going straight to the bank. I will retrieve that watch, I will take it to a pawn shop, and I will have it melted down into unidentifiable scrap metal. You will never see it again. Do not test me, Maya. I will destroy his memory. The holding room went dead silent. Agent Vance tensed his shoulders, preparing to physically intervene and subdue my father. I held up my hand, signaling the agent to hold his position. I walked slowly across the room, my heels clicking sharply against the tile, until I was standing mere inches away from my father. I looked at the tarnished brass key dangling from his trembling fingers. Then I looked directly into his panicked, bloodshot eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of fear. I leaned in close, letting my words slip into the space between us with devastating precision. I hacked your personal banking profile and emptied that safe deposit box 3 years ago, I whispered softly. I have worn that watch under my sleeve every single day since I took it. You have been guarding an empty safe. Richard's eyes bulged impossibly wide. The remaining color drained entirely from his face as his mind finally broke under the crushing weight of his ultimate failure. He let out a primal roar of pure, unadulterated rage and lunged directly at my throat, but the federal agents were faster, tackling him violently to the concrete floor before his hands could even graze my collar. Richard hit the concrete floor with a heavy, sickening thud. The federal agents pinned his arms violently behind his back, snuffing out his primal roar before it could escalate. He thrashed like a wild animal, spitting venomous curses at me, while the cold steel handcuffs locked tightly around his wrists. I stood perfectly still, watching the men drag my father out of the holding room. He kicked and screamed all the way down the corridor, his desperate threats echoing off the sterile walls until the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. I looked down at my wrist, the vintage Patek Philippe watch ticking steadily against my skin. I took a deep breath, believing the worst was finally over. I was entirely wrong. 2 weeks later, the real war began. Marcus and Chloe managed to post bail drawing on hidden emergency funds they had concealed from the federal investigators. Facing decades in a federal penitentiary, they were backed into a corner and needed a massive public distraction to muddy the legal waters. They found their weapon by launching a vicious, highly coordinated social media smear campaign against me. I woke up on a Tuesday morning to my phone vibrating relentlessly off the nightstand. My inbox was completely flooded with urgent notifications, missed calls from journalists, and frantic alerts from the Apex Financial Public Relations Department. Chloe had recorded a highly stylized, tear-filled video sitting on the edge of a bed in a run-down, dilapidated motel room. She wore no makeup, her hair was deliberately unkempt, and she looked directly into the camera with wide, terrified eyes. She rubbed her stomach, claiming she was newly pregnant and sobbing hysterically about how her ruthless billionaire sister had forcibly evicted her onto the street. She spun a fabricated tale of absolute horror, accusing me of orchestrating a hostile takeover of the family estate and throwing our destitute elderly parents out into the cold. She painted me as a greedy corporate tyrant, a sociopath who fabricated federal charges just to eliminate my own family and hoard their modest wealth. Marcus used his remaining dark web connections to weaponize the video. He purchased massive bot networks to amplify Chloe's manufactured misery across every major social media platform. Within hours, the video went viral, generating millions of views and triggering a tsunami of public outrage directed squarely at me. The internet mob descended with terrifying speed. Anonymous users flooded Apex Financial's digital platforms with death threats, boycotts, and demands for my immediate termination. Paparazzi ambushed me outside my apartment building, screaming questions about my pregnant sister. The public relations nightmare grew so incredibly toxic that by Thursday afternoon, Apex Financial saw its stock dip for the first time in 3 consecutive quarters. The panic in the executive suites was palpable. I was summoned immediately to the top-floor glass boardroom where the entire Apex board of directors sat, waiting alongside Valerie. The atmosphere was incredibly hostile, smelling of expensive cologne and sheer corporate panic. The chairman of the board, an imposing man who had always resented my rapid ascent to leadership, slid a printed report of the stock fluctuations across the polished mahogany table. He pointed a rigid finger at the declining numbers and demanded that Valerie suspend me immediately until the family drama blew over. Apex Financial relies on absolute public trust, not tabloid circus drama. The chairman barked, his voice vibrating with anger. We manage wealth for the top 1% of the globe. We cannot have a senior partner who is actively being villainized by the global public as a domestic abuser. You are a catastrophic liability, Maya. You are bleeding our market capitalization by the hour. Valerie stood her ground, her posture rigid and unyielding. She reminded the panicked board members that I had just saved the firm from a multi-million-dollar corporate espionage theft. She argued that throwing me to the wolves over a fabricated social media video would show profound corporate weakness. The board, however, refused to listen to reason. Optics ruled their world, and the optics were currently destroying their quarterly projections. They issued a brutal, uncompromising ultimatum. I had exactly 24 hours to completely clear my name publicly and kill the viral smear campaign. If I failed, my senior partner title would be permanently revoked, and I would be placed on indefinite unpaid administrative leave pending termination. I walked out of that boardroom with my entire career hanging by a fraying thread. I did not waste time calling damage control firms or crying in the nearest restroom. I marched straight to my secure office, locked the heavy glass door, and booted up my primary terminal. Marcus had orchestrated the viral attack, but he was inherently arrogant and notoriously sloppy with his digital footprints. I launched the proprietary data analysis software I originally designed to track high-frequency trading anomalies. I bypassed the standard social media platforms and ran a deep packet inspection on the original video files, isolating the hidden metadata embedded deep within Chloe's upload. It took 6 hours of relentless coding, peeling back endless layers of proxy servers, and navigating a maze of fake IP addresses. I drank 3 cups of black coffee, my eyes burning against the glow of the monitors, as the 24-hour deadline rapidly ticked away. Finally, I smashed through the last firewall and hit a solid digital wall. The viral videos were being hosted and aggressively broadcasted from a heavily encrypted offshore server located deep in the Cayman Islands. I initiated a brute force decryption sequence, leveraging the massive processing power of the Apex mainframe to rip through the offshore server's security protocols. I expected to find a network of rented bot farms and a few paid digital marketing invoices. Instead, the server cracked open to reveal a massive, highly structured corporate directory. It was not just a staging ground for a petty family smear campaign. It was Marcus's primary digital Dropbox. I opened the main root folder, my eyes scanning lines of hidden data. My heart began to pound violently against my ribs. The server housed hundreds of heavily encrypted client ledgers, routing numbers, and offshore shell company profiles. I ran a rapid algorithmic cross-reference on the account names, matching them against federal financial watch lists. Marcus was not just hiding gambling debts and orchestrating corporate espionage. The ledgers detailed a highly sophisticated illicit financial network, proving conclusively that my brother-in-law had been laundering tens of millions of dollars for an international drug cartel for the past decade. The glowing lines of decrypted data on my monitor spelled out a decade of staggering federal offenses. Marcus was not just a sloppy corporate saboteur, he was a primary financial launderer for a transnational cartel, The sheer volume of illicit capital flowing through those offshore shell companies was astronomical. I did not hesitate for a single second. I routed the decrypted ledgers directly to the secure executive printers. The heavy machines hummed to life, spitting out hundreds of pages of undeniable hard-coded proof. I gathered the thick stacks of documents, binding them forcefully into a massive leather folder. I knew exactly where my family would be. It was Sunday afternoon. Despite facing federal espionage charges and launching a viral smear campaign against me, Richard and Barbara would never miss their weekly brunch at the Oak Ridge Elite Country Club. Social optics were their religion, and they needed to play the persecuted victims in front of their wealthy peers. I drove straight to the club, bypassing the valet stand, and walking purposefully through the manicured mahogany doors. The main dining terrace was bathed in warm sunlight, filled with the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the low, arrogant hum of affluent gossip. I spotted them instantly. They were seated at the premier center table, a position of utmost status. Richard was holding court, gesturing dramatically, while Barbara dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a linen napkin. Marcus and Chloe sat beside them, absorbing the sympathetic murmurs of the surrounding elite families. I marched directly across the pristine terrace. The ambient chatter died down rapidly as people noticed my approach. I reached their table and slammed the massive leather folder down with explosive force. The heavy thud rattled the fine china and instantly silenced the entire terrace. The brunch ambush. "Hello, family," I announced, projecting my voice so every neighboring table could hear with crystal clarity. "I brought some light reading for your Sunday brunch." Richard's face flushed a violent, furious crimson. "Maya, you insolent brat!" Richard hissed, gripping the edge of the table. "How dare you show your face here after what you have done to your sister? You are a disgrace." I ignored his pathetic blustering and flipped the heavy leather folder open. "You launched a viral smear campaign to paint me as a corporate tyrant," I stated loudly, pulling out the first stack of printed ledgers. "But you were incredibly sloppy, Marcus. You hosted those fake videos on the exact same offshore Cayman server you used to launder illicit capital for the cartel." Marcus turned the color of wet chalk. His eyes bulged out of his skull as he recognized the highly encrypted financial routing numbers printed on the top page. He realized instantly that his entire criminal empire was sitting exposed in the middle of a country club. He lunged across the table, his arms outstretched like a desperate animal trying to snatch the folder from my hands. His elbow caught a heavy silver tray of mimosas. Crystal glasses went flying, crashing to the stone floor in a spectacular explosion of shattered glass and orange juice. He scrambled frantically across the tablecloth, clawing at the spilled documents and knocking over plates of expensive food. "Shut up!" Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "Shut your mouth right now, Maya. Give me those papers, the public annihilation." I stepped back effortlessly, letting him scramble in the spilled champagne and ruined food. I raised my voice even louder, ensuring that the wealthiest families in the state heard every single syllable. "Marcus Blackwood has spent the last 10 years washing tens of millions of dollars in cartel blood money," I declared to the horrified audience. I pointed sharply at the scattered documents: shell companies in Panama, fake real estate acquisitions in Miami, phantom consulting fees routed through Apex financial networks. "You thought you could frame me for your pathetic espionage attempt, but you just handed me the master keys to your entire international money laundering syndicate." Chloe sat paralyzed in her chair, her mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. Barbara pressed a trembling hand over her chest, her carefully constructed high society facade shattering into pieces. She finally realized that the social annihilation she feared most was happening in real time, broadcast live to the absolute worst possible audience. The whispers from the surrounding tables grew into loud, scandalous gasps. The commotion had immediately drawn the attention of the club management. The general manager, a rigid man who prized absolute discretion above all else, marched onto the terrace flanked by 3 massive security guards. He had heard enough. Richard, the manager, barked, his face twisted in absolute disgust. "This club maintains a zero-tolerance policy for criminal elements. We will not harbor federal targets or money launderers on these premises. Your family membership is revoked effective immediately." Security will escort you all off the property right now. You are permanently banned. The ultimate threat. The ultimate social death sentence had just been pronounced. Barbara lost her grip on reality completely. She leaped from her chair, her face contorted in raw, unhinged fury. Her expensive pearls bounced wildly against her chest as she lost all semblance of country club decorum. "I will end you for this!" Barbara shrieked at the top of her lungs, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "I will end your life, Maya. You have destroyed our family. You have stripped us of our status and our wealth. You are dead to me." I simply stared at her, entirely unfazed by her hollow, pathetic threats. She was a woman who possessed zero real power, entirely reliant on the illusion of wealth that I had just publicly dismantled. But the true threat was not my screaming mother. The crowd of whispering club members suddenly parted. A new man stepped forward, cutting through the chaos with a chilling, absolute calm. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his posture radiating a quiet, lethal danger. He was clearly not a country club member. He ignored Richard. He ignored the furious club manager and the approaching security guards. He walked directly up to our table and looked down at the spilled financial ledgers soaking in champagne. Then he slowly raised his dark, predatory eyes to meet mine. "Ms. Wilson," the man said, his voice a smooth, terrifyingly polite baritone that sent a spike of pure ice down my spine. "I could not help but overhear your very public announcement. It appears you have acquired my personal financial ledgers, and I am going to need those back immediately." "I suggest we take this conversation somewhere more intimate," the man said softly, gesturing with a fluid motion toward the heavy mahogany doors of the club's private dining room just off the main terrace. He did not raise his voice or make any sudden movements, but the sheer suffocating gravity of his presence left zero room for argument. Richard and Barbara, completely stripped of their country club bravado, obeyed instantly. They scrambled out of their chairs like frightened prey, pulling Chloe along with them. Marcus looked as though he might vomit right onto the imported marble tiles, his legs shaking so violently he could barely walk. I picked up my leather folder and followed them, maintaining a steady, measured pace. The moment we stepped into the private dining room, the man smoothly shut the heavy oak doors, instantly cutting off the ambient noise of the brunch crowd. He reached out and slid the brass deadbolt into place with a definitive echoing click. The room was incredibly opulent, featuring a long mahogany table surrounded by velvet chairs. But the atmosphere immediately plunged to sub-zero. The man did not bother with pleasantries. He walked directly over to Marcus, grabbed him by the scruff of his expensive suit, and violently shoved him into a chair. Before Marcus could even gasp for air, the man reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out a suppressed pistol, and jammed the cold steel barrel directly under the table, pressing it hard against Marcus's kneecap. Marcus let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper, tears instantly streaming down his face as a dark stain began to spread across the front of his designer trousers. "You owe me $40 million, Marcus," the man stated, his tone conversational yet dripping with lethal intent. "I trusted you to wash my capital through your firm. Instead, I find out you have been siphoning my funds to cover your offshore gambling losses, and now my highly sensitive ledgers are being thrown around a public country club. You have exactly 10 seconds to tell me how you are going to make me whole, or I am going to shatter this knee, and then we will move on to the other one." Richard and Barbara backed away, pressing themselves flat against the floral wallpaper in absolute terror. They were staring down the barrel of genuine life-ending consequences, a reality their wealth and status had always shielded them from. In that moment of pure, unadulterated fear, my parents revealed the absolute blackness of their souls. They did not shield their pregnant daughter. They did not try to negotiate. My father literally reached out, grabbed my shoulder, and violently shoved me forward into the center of the room. "She is the rich one," Richard screamed, his voice cracking with cowardly desperation as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "Take her. She is a senior partner at Apex Financial. She controls billions. She can pay your $40 million right now. Just let us leave." Barbara nodded frantically, her hands clasped together in pathetic prayer. "Please," Barbara sobbed, offering me up to a cartel enforcer without a single ounce of hesitation. "Take Maya. She works at Apex. She has the money. We have absolutely nothing to do with this. We are completely innocent. I looked at the two people who had brought me into this world. I looked at the sheer terrifying ease with which they had just offered my life in exchange for their own. Any lingering microscopic shred of familial obligation I held for them evaporated into thin air. I felt nothing but absolute freezing clarity. I did not cower. I did not tremble. I slowly reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted Apex tablet. I tapped the screen, bringing up the secure network interface, and calmly turned the glowing display toward the man with the gun. You can shoot Marcus, but he is completely bankrupt, I stated, my voice as hard and unyielding as a diamond. You can shoot me, but I have already utilized Apex Financial's institutional leverage to place a hard algorithmic freeze on every single one of your offshore Cayman accounts. The money is locked. Furthermore, my biometric pulse is currently synced to a dead man switch on this device. If my heart rate drops, the unencrypted ledgers are automatically forwarded directly to the FBI and the SEC. The man slowly shifted his gaze from the terrified, whimpering Marcus to me. He did not pull the trigger. He studied the complex firewall protocols displayed on my tablet, his dark eyes narrowing with genuine calculating respect. He recognized a professional who held absolute leverage. I am listening, he said softly, keeping the gun pressed against Marcus. I am going to offer you a one-time non-negotiable deal. I proposed, maintaining direct eye contact. I will utilize a proprietary Apex Shell Corporation to legally and perfectly wash your $40 million. I will route it back to you through untraceable legitimate corporate acquisitions. You will receive every single cent completely clean. But I require a specific service in return. Name your price, the man replied smoothly. I want Marcus permanently erased from the financial and legal world. I demanded, pointing at my sniveling brother-in-law. I want you to leverage your network to ensure his immediate, irrevocable disbarment. I want his reputation reduced to absolute ash, guaranteeing he never touches a legal document, a corporate account, or a single cent of capital ever again. You handle Marcus, and you get your funds released by midnight. The man looked at Marcus, who was now openly sobbing, begging for mercy. Then he looked back at me, a slow, dangerous smirk spreading across his face. He smoothly withdrew the pistol from under the table and tucked it back inside his tailored jacket. It is a rare pleasure doing business with a true professional. Ms. Wilson, the man said, giving me a curt, respectful nod, you have yourself a deal. He turned on his heel and moved swiftly toward the private side exit of the dining room, disappearing into the service corridor, just as the heavy oak main doors were violently battered open. A tactical unit of local police officers, summoned minutes ago by the panicked country club manager, swarmed into the room with weapons drawn and radios blaring. Marcus saw the police and completely lost his mind. Believing this was his only chance to escape federal prison and cartel retaliation, he made a frantic, desperate dash toward the side exit. He did not make it 3 steps. In his blind panic, his foot caught directly on the strap of Chloe's discarded 6-inch designer heels that she had kicked off in her earlier terror. Marcus launched forward, suspended in the air for a fraction of a second before eating the solid mahogany floor face first. The sickening crunch of his nose breaking echoed loudly over the shouts of the police. Before he could even groan in pain, 3 heavy officers piled onto his back, aggressively pinning him to the floor and slamming cold metal cuffs onto his wrists, while my parents watched in absolute helpless horror. The image of Marcus bleeding on the mahogany floor, screaming as federal agents dragged him away, was a fitting end to the country club brunch. His arraignment the following morning was brutal and brief. Given his newly exposed ties to an international cartel and his immediate flight attempt, the judge denied bail entirely. Marcus was sent straight to a maximum security federal holding facility. My family was out of options, out of money, and completely out of their minds. I knew exactly what they would do next. It happened the following night, just after 10 o'clock. I was sitting on my living room sofa, sipping a glass of water, when the violent sound of splintering wood shattered the quiet of my apartment. The heavy brass deadbolt tore through the door frame with a sickening crunch. The door flew open, slamming hard against the wall. Richard charged into the entryway, his face a mask of pure, unhinged desperation. Barbara and Chloe followed close behind him, their eyes wild and frantic. They looked nothing like the polished elite family they pretended to be. They looked like cornered scavengers. Richard did not hesitate. He crossed the living room in 3 massive strides and violently kicked the glass coffee table out of his way. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending sharp shards flying across the rug. He loomed over me, his chest, heaving, his hands balled into tight fists. He and Barbara flanked me on either side, effectively trapping me against the back of the sofa while Chloe paced the room like a caged animal. "You are going to fix this right now." Maya, Richard snarled, his voice vibrating with rage. "Marcus is sitting in a maximum security cell. His accounts are completely frozen. We have zero access to capital, and every high-profile defense attorney in the city requires a massive upfront retainer. You are going to sign over your unvested Apex stock options to me immediately. We need $10 million by tomorrow morning to build his defense and pay off the right people to keep the cartel off our backs." "You put him there," Chloe screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at my face. "You ruined my life. You owe us every single cent you have. You will liquidate your portfolio, or I swear to God, Maya, we will make sure you never walk into that firm again." Barbara leaned in close, her perfume smelling sour and rancid mixed with her nervous sweat. "Do not test us," she hissed, her eyes narrowing into dark slits. "We have absolutely nothing left to lose. You will transfer those assets tonight, or we will physically force you to sign the authorization papers. You are not leaving this room until the money is in our accounts." I did not flinch. I did not reach for my phone to call the police. I did not scream for help. I sat perfectly still, looking at the 3 of them crowding my personal space. I slowly raised my left arm and checked the time on my vintage Patek Philippe watch. It was exactly 10:15. I looked back up at my father, offering him a cold, completely empty smile. "You are right about one thing," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You really do have nothing left to lose, but you are terribly mistaken about what I possess." I stood up slowly, forcing Richard to take a half step back. I anticipated this exact level of pathetic desperation the second Marcus launched his smear campaign against me. I knew the moment the cartel funds were frozen, you would try to bleed me dry to save yourselves. You only care about status and self-preservation. So I removed the target. "What are you talking about?" Richard barked, his confidence wavering slightly. "I do not own this apartment anymore," I stated clearly. "The moment your little internet stunt hit the Apex boardroom, I knew I needed absolute liquidity and zero physical liabilities. I sold this unit 2 days ago to a private equity real estate developer. I took a significant loss on the market value just for the sheer convenience of a 24-hour expedited cash closing. I packed everything of value yesterday, and I have been sitting here waiting for you to do exactly what I knew you would do. I am officially a trespasser in this unit right now, but more importantly, so are you." Before Richard could even process the words, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the broken door. A man stepped over the splintered wood and walked into the apartment. He was a notorious commercial real estate developer known throughout the financial district for his ruthless zero-tolerance business tactics and his penchant for aggressive property management. He wore a sharp black suit and was flanked by 2 massive, heavily muscled bodyguards who immediately stepped inside and blocked the only exit. The developer looked down at the shattered doorframe, then at the broken glass coffee table littering the floor. He pulled a sleek silver pen from his jacket pocket and casually jotted a number down on a leather notepad. He ripped the page out, walked directly up to Richard, and shoved the paper against my father's chest. "That is a $15,000 invoice for the custom security door you just destroyed," the developer said, his voice dripping with absolute menace. "And since you decided to break into my private property and vandalize my asset, I am not feeling particularly generous." Barbara gasped, backing away until she hit the wall. Chloe froze, her hysterical anger instantly turning into sheer terror at the sight of the bodyguards. Richard looked at the invoice in his hand, his jaw working silently as his brain finally caught up to the reality of the trap he had just blindly walked into. The developer pulled out his phone and dialed, keeping his cold eyes fixed on my panicked parents. "Yes, operator," he said, his voice echoing in the tense room. "I need immediate police assistance at my property. I have 3 intruders caught committing felony breaking and entering and causing massive property damage. Send units immediately." The police arrived in less than 4 minutes. Richard desperately tried to leverage his country club voice, demanding to speak to the captain. But the arresting officers were completely unimpressed by his ruined suit and sweaty red face. Barbara shrieked as cold steel handcuffs snapped forcefully around her wrists, while Chloe sobbed hysterically, being shoved into the back of a flashing squad car. I stood safely behind the developer and his massive bodyguards, watching the red and blue lights paint the hallway as my family was hauled away for felony breaking and entering. They managed to avoid actual prison time for the break-in, but the legal cost broke them completely. Richard was forced to liquidate his last remaining retirement asset just to cover their bail, the property damage invoice, and their initial misdemeanor fines. They were utterly destitute. Marcus was still rotting in a maximum security federal cell, and his high-powered defense attorneys were demanding millions they simply did not possess. A normal family would have surrendered. A normal family would have found cheap public defenders and accepted their fate. But Barbara and Richard were pathologically incapable of living without wealth and status. 2 weeks later, my Apex cybersecurity alert system flagged a massive spike in digital traffic associated directly with my name. I opened my laptop and stared at a newly launched high society website. Barbara had orchestrated a desperate last-ditch scam. She was hosting the inaugural gala for falsely accused families at the Grand Plaza Hotel. It was explicitly marketed as a philanthropic legal defense fund for victims of federal overreach. But the true grift was plastered right across the top banner in bold, glittering gold lettering. Sponsored by Apex Financial Senior Partner Maya Wilson. They were using my corporate title and my unblemished industry reputation to legitimize their pathetic crowdfunding scam. They were leveraging the exact daughter they had just tried to physically extort to extract cash from the city's remaining gullible elite. Valerie called me within 10 minutes of the site going live, her voice tight with corporate concern. She urged me to unleash the Apex legal team to issue an immediate cease and desist. I told her absolutely not. A quiet legal letter would only allow them to cancel the event and play the victim yet again. I needed a permanent public execution. I contacted the Grand Plaza event coordinator through an untraceable offshore LLC I had established years ago. I wired $50,000 to secure the absolute best VIP table in the ballroom under the alias of a reclusive European venture capitalist. The night of the gala. The Grand Plaza ballroom was draped in ridiculous faux elegance. Crystal chandeliers illuminated tables covered in white silk and cheap centerpieces. Barbara had managed to pack the room with second-tier socialites, aging philanthropists, and gullible business owners who still believed the Wilson name carried weight. I slipped into the ballroom wearing a sharp black tuxedo suit, keeping my head down as the lights dimmed. I took my seat at the shadowed VIP booth near the back of the room and immediately pulled my encrypted tablet from my clutch. The venue's audiovisual network was shockingly unsecured. It took me exactly 4 minutes to bypass the basic firewall and gain master control of the primary projector system. I sat back, crossed my legs, and watched the stage. Barbara stepped up to the podium wearing a rented designer gown. She gripped the edges of the mahogany stand and unleashed a masterclass in theatrical manipulation. Real tears spilled down her cheeks as she gripped the microphone. She spoke of justice, of federal tyranny, and of poor innocent Marcus being torn away from his pregnant wife. She gestured widely to the wealthy crowd, begging them to open their checkbooks to fight this terrible systemic injustice. You see the human cost of these false accusations. Barbara wailed, her voice echoing through the massive speakers. Look at the screen behind me and see the loving father your generous donations are going to save. That was my cue. Barbara pressed the remote clicker, expecting a heavily edited slideshow of Marcus playing with golden retrievers and hugging Chloe. Instead, I executed the override protocol. The massive digital screens flanking the stage flashed violently green, then stabilized into a razor-sharp high-definition feed. I bypassed the slideshow entirely and mirrored my tablet directly to the screens displaying the live routing data of the gala's main donation escrow account. The ballroom fell dead silent. Barbara turned around, freezing in absolute horror. On the massive 20-foot screens, every single donation that the wealthy guests were currently wiring from their phones was clearly visible. But the money was not staying in a legal defense fund. The live feed showed the capital hitting the charity account and instantly auto-routing through a hidden digital backdoor. The destination accounts were explicitly displayed in massive bold text. Chloe Blackwood Personal Checking. Chloe Blackwood Offshore Commerce. I split the screen perfectly. On the left side, the guests watched their $1,000 donations process. On the right side, they watched live automated shopping receipts populating in real time. The supposedly desperate and destitute Chloe had set up an autopay script linked directly to the charity account. The screen vividly broadcasted her live purchases. $12,000 routed instantly to Cartier, $8,000 to an exclusive Milan designer boutique, $15,000 transferred to a luxury Caribbean resort holding fee. They were not funding a legal defense. They were directly financing Chloe's revenge shopping spree. A low, dangerous murmur rippled through the ballroom. A prominent real estate mogul in the front row stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "You are stealing our money right in front of us," the mogul roared, pointing a furious finger at the stage. "You are routing our charitable donations directly to a jewelry store." Barbara gripped the podium, her knuckles turning white. "No, no," she stammered, the microphone amplifying her absolute panic. "That is a mistake. The system is hacked. It is a glitch." "It is not a glitch, Barbara," a wealthy philanthropist shouted, throwing her silk napkin onto the table. "That screen literally shows my specific $5,000 wire transfer paying for your daughter's designer handbags. You fraudulent thieves." The entire ballroom erupted in unadulterated fury. Dozens of wealthy, furious donors surged out of their seats, storming toward the stage and screaming for their money back. The ballroom descended into absolute anarchy. Champagne flutes shattered against the polished marble floor as the city's elite abandoned all decorum. Barbara stood frozen behind the podium, her rented designer gown trembling, her face completely drained of color as the crowd closed in like sharks smelling blood. Chloe took one look at the mob and her own damning shopping receipts flashing on the 20-foot screens and made a frantic dash for the service exit. She shoved past a line of startled waitstaff, sending silver trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres crashing to the tile. She sprinted through the swinging kitchen doors, her stilettos slipping on the grease-slicked floor, desperately trying to reach the loading dock. But the wealthy donors were faster. A group of furious tech executives and a highly connected real estate heiress flanked the kitchen exits, entirely cutting off her escape route. They pinned Chloe against the stainless steel prep stations, waving their phones in her face and aggressively demanding immediate wire reversals while she sobbed, cornered like a trapped rat. Back in the main ballroom, Richard decided to play the hero. He ripped the microphone from Barbara's shaking hands, his face slick with panic sweat. He bellowed for quiet, the audio feedback shrieking through the room, desperate to regain control of his evaporating social empire. "Listen to me," Richard shouted, his voice laced with pure, arrogant desperation. "The funds are perfectly secure. We simply used Chloe's accounts as a temporary holding matrix to bypass IRS oversight." The room went dead silent. The rage was momentarily suspended by sheer, unadulterated disbelief, Richard entirely failing to read the room and believing he was sounding like a brilliant financial strategist, kept digging his own grave. "The federal government unfairly froze Marcus's assets, so I legally restructured our remaining capital through untraceable Cayman shell entities to avoid the federal tax lien," Richard proudly explained to the furious crowd. "I routed everything through Chloe's name so the auditors could not touch it. Your money is safe from the government, I assure you." He had just confessed to deliberate, premeditated tax evasion, wire fraud, and international money laundering on a hot microphone in front of 200 people. Half the room instantly pulled out their phones. I watched a prominent venture capitalist in the front row directly dial the SEC fraud hotline. The roar of the crowd reignited, twice as ferocious as before, with several guests now throwing their centerpieces at the stage. I did not stick around to watch the police arrive for round two. I packed up my encrypted tablet, slipped out through the VIP lounge doors, and took the private service elevator down to the subterranean parking garage. The air was cool and thick with the smell of exhaust. My heels echoed rhythmically on the concrete as I walked toward my waiting town car. I felt a profound sense of closure. The Wilson family reputation was permanently incinerated. The screech of burning rubber shattered the silence. I whipped my head around just in time to see high-beam headlights snap on at the far end of the garage, blindingly bright in the dim underground space. It was a silver Porsche 911, the exact sports car Chloe had purchased 3 years ago by secretly draining the college trust fund our grandfather had originally established for me. The engine roared a deafening mechanical scream bouncing off the concrete walls. Through the windshield, I saw Chloe's face. She had somehow slipped past the kitchen mob and found the one person she blamed for her entire world collapsing. She was completely unhinged. Her eyes were wild, her makeup smeared, her teeth bared in a feral snarl. She slammed her foot on the accelerator. The Porsche launched forward, tires smoking against the pavement, rocketing directly toward me at 60 miles an hour. I had less than 2 seconds to react. I abandoned my bag and dove violently sideways, launching myself behind a massive load-bearing concrete pillar just as the silver blur clipped the edge of my coat. The sound of the impact was absolute devastation. The Porsche slammed head-on into the pillar with a violent crunching explosion of tearing metal and shattering glass. The hood crumpled upward like a crushed soda can, folding entirely over the windshield. A thick cloud of white smoke and boiling radiator fluid hissed aggressively into the air. The heavy muffled thud of the deploying airbags echoed through the empty garage, followed by the sickening crunch of the collapsing undercarriage. Silence descended, broken only by the ticking of the destroyed engine and the hiss of leaking fluids. Despite everything they had done to me, a primal human instinct took over. I scrambled to my feet, my knees scraped and bleeding, and rushed toward the mangled driver's side door. I pulled out my phone to dial emergency services, bracing myself for the worst. I wrenched the dented handle open, coughing through the acrid gunpowder-scented smoke of the airbags, leaning in to see if my sister was still breathing. Chloe was slumped against the deflated airbag, blood trickling from a small cut on her forehead, her rented gown torn. But the moment I leaned in, her eyes snapped open. The shock instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating and predatory malice. Before I could even ask if she was alive, Chloe began thrashing wildly against the seatbelt. She clawed at her own face, smearing the blood across her cheeks, and unleashed a blood-curdling hysterical scream that echoed up the ramp of the parking garage. "Help me!" Chloe shrieked, her eyes locked onto a pair of approaching hotel security guards who were sprinting down the ramp toward the crash. "Help me, please. She tried to kill me." Maya dragged me out of the gala and smashed my face into the steering wheel. The security guards rushed forward, their radios blaring as they positioned themselves between us. I took a slow, deliberate step back and raised my hands, keeping my palms flat and perfectly visible. I did not argue with the hysterical woman trapped in the crumpled luxury vehicle. I did not scream back to defend my reputation. When the local police arrived less than 10 minutes later, I complied perfectly, allowing them to place me in the back of a squad car, while an ambulance whisked a sobbing, thrashing Chloe away to the nearest emergency room. By 2:00 in the morning, I was sitting in a stark, windowless interrogation room at the downtown precinct. The heavy metal door swung open, and Detective Reynolds marched in. He tossed a thick manila folder onto the metal table with a loud, resounding slap. He leaned forward, planting his large hands flat on the surface, attempting to physically intimidate me. He looked at my pristine tuxedo suit and perfectly arranged hair with absolute disgust. "Your sister has a shattered radius, a fractured cheekbone, and a moderate concussion," Reynolds stated, his voice laced with aggressive contempt. "She just gave a full sworn statement from her hospital bed. She claims you cornered her in the parking garage, dragged her from the vehicle by her hair, and violently smashed her head repeatedly into the dashboard. She is pressing charges for attempted murder, Ms. Wilson." I remained perfectly still, adjusting the immaculate cuffs of my tailored blazer. "And my parents?" I asked mildly, keeping my gaze locked on his. "I assume they are waiting right outside." Reynolds scoffed, pulling a metal chair out and scraping it loudly against the linoleum floor. "They are cooperating fully with the investigation. Your father has already contacted his civil litigators. They are planning to sue you for everything you are worth, to cover your sister's massive medical bills and her severe emotional distress. They have got a completely airtight narrative. A wealthy, jealous sister attacks the defenseless pregnant sibling out of pure spite. You are looking at 10 to 15 years in a state penitentiary. I smiled, a slow, freezing expression that made the seasoned detective pause. My parents were predictably pathetic. They honestly believed this was their golden ticket out of bankruptcy. Send the cold, unloving daughter to prison and bleed her apex assets dry through a wrongful injury civil suit. It was a desperate, beautiful fantasy that I was about to completely incinerate. Detective Reynolds. I began leaning forward slightly, so the overhead light caught my eyes. My sister is a pathological liar, and my parents are currently bankrupt felons desperate for capital. But you do not have to take my word for it. I reached slowly into my interior blazer pocket. Reynolds tensed instinctively, moving a hand toward his heavy utility belt. I calmly pulled out a sleek encrypted USB drive and placed it gently in the exact center of the scratched metal table. "What is this?" he demanded, eyeing the small drive suspiciously as if it might detonate. "This is the definitive end of your investigation," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the small room. "I am a senior partner at a multi-billion-dollar financial firm. My personal security protocols are extensive and absolute. My car, a matte black Mercedes Maybach, was parked exactly 3 spaces down and directly opposite from where my sister crashed her vehicle. It is equipped with a military-grade 360-degree continuous recording dashcam." Reynolds stopped breathing for a fraction of a second, his brow furrowing as the reality of my words began to sink in. "That drive contains the raw, unedited, high-definition footage of the entire incident," I explained, tapping the USB drive with one manicured fingernail. "You will clearly see me walking peacefully toward my vehicle. You will see my sister start her engine, turn on her high beams, and intentionally accelerate her sports car to 60 miles an hour, attempting to run me down. You will see me dive behind a concrete pillar to save my own life. And you will see her crash her own car absolutely unaided. It is premeditated vehicular assault." Reynolds stared at me, his tough guy interrogation act completely evaporating into the stale air. He snatched the drive off the table, walked quickly over to the corner computer terminal, and plugged it in. The room fell dead silent except for the low mechanical hum of the desktop tower. For 2 straight minutes, the detective watched the screen. The monitor illuminated his face, casting harsh blue shadows over his features as he witnessed Chloe rocketing the silver Porsche directly at me. He watched her smash violently into the concrete pillar. He watched me run over to check on her well-being. He watched her fake the entire vicious attack the moment security arrived. He abruptly pulled the USB drive from the tower, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. He did not say another word to me. He turned on his heel and marched straight out of the interrogation room, leaving the heavy metal door wide open. From my seat, I had a direct line of sight into the bustling precinct waiting area. Richard and Barbara were sitting on a blue plastic bench, holding hands and whispering feverishly to each other. They looked utterly triumphant. They were already spending my money in their heads, dividing up my stock options and liquidating my real estate portfolio. Detective Reynolds marched directly up to them. They stood immediately, pasting on dramatic looks of profound parental grief. Detective Richard said, stepping forward with false authority, "Have you formally charged her yet? We want to ensure Maya is held without bail. She is a violent danger to our family." Reynolds stopped a foot away from my father, his expression hard and completely unyielding. "We are not charging Maya with anything, Mr. Wilson. In fact, she is free to go immediately." Barbara's fake grief vanished, instantly replaced by screeching indignation. "What are you talking about? She tried to murder my pregnant daughter. You have her sworn statement. We also have high-definition video evidence proving your daughter completely fabricated the attack," Reynolds stated, his voice booming across the quiet waiting room for every single police officer to hear. "The footage clearly shows Chloe intentionally accelerating her vehicle in a premeditated attempt to run Maya over." Richard staggered backward as if he had been physically struck by a heavy, blunt object, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. "I have just dispatched 2 armed officers to the hospital," Reynolds continued, relentless and precise. "They are standing guard outside Chloe's room right now." The second she is medically cleared, she is being placed in handcuffs and charged with felony vehicular assault, attempted manslaughter, and filing a false police report. Barbara let out a high-pitched, gasping wheeze. The absolute realization that their final desperate scam had completely backfired, that their precious golden child was going to a federal prison right alongside Marcus, hit her like a runaway freight train. Her eyes rolled back into her head, her knees buckled, and she collapsed, hitting the precinct floor in a dead, genuine faint. Richard did not even attempt to catch his wife as she hit the linoleum. He simply stood there, his mouth hanging open in absolute shock, while Detective Reynolds casually signaled for a precinct medic to scrape Barbara off the floor. Within an hour, the entire family found themselves back at the hospital, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Chloe was no longer the pampered victim holding court in a luxury suite. She was a criminal suspect. A heavy steel handcuff linked her uninjured left wrist directly to the metal rail of her hospital bed. Two uniformed police officers stood guard right outside her door, completely ignoring her demands for a private room and organic green juice. She screamed at the nurses, she threatened to sue the attending physician, and she threw her plastic water pitcher at the wall, but reality was finally setting in. The golden child was permanently trapped, facing years in a state penitentiary for felony vehicular assault and filing a false police report. Richard paced the harsh, fluorescent-lit hospital corridor, his mind fracturing under the weight of his absolute ruin. Marcus was locked in a federal holding cell. Chloe was chained to a bed facing hard time. Barbara was sitting in the waiting room, hyperventilating into a brown paper bag. The charity funds had been seized by the authorities. They were entirely out of money, out of favors, and out of time. But Richard, in his infinite narcissistic delusion, believed he still possessed one final weapon. He believed he could leverage the corporate reputation of Apex Financial to save his skin. He managed to get a hold of Valerie, the CEO of Apex, directly using a contact number he had stolen from my phone years ago. He demanded an immediate meeting in the hospital cafeteria, threatening to bring a massive media circus to her corporate doorstep if she refused. Valerie, being the apex predator she was, agreed instantly. She called me and we walked into the sterile hospital cafeteria together an hour later. Valerie wore a pristine white trench coat and a diamond tennis necklace, looking like she owned the entire medical facility. I stood silently right beside her as she glided past the vending machines and sat opposite Richard at a sticky plastic table. Richard leaned forward, planting his sweaty palms on the table, attempting to look imposing. He ignored me completely, focusing all his desperate manic energy on Valerie. "You are going to fix this mess right now, Valerie," he demanded, his voice shaking with arrogant rage. "You are going to pay for Chloe's top-tier criminal defense team, and you are going to force Maya to drop these absurd assault charges immediately. If you do not wire $5 million into my offshore account, by the end of the day, I am going straight to the Wall Street Journal. I will tell them that Apex Financial promotes unstable, violent sociopaths who force pregnant women into severe car crashes. I will destroy your firm's stock price before the market even opens tomorrow morning." Valerie did not blink. She did not raise her voice or show a single ounce of concern. She slowly reached into her designer handbag and placed a single flawlessly crisp sheet of paper on the sticky table. "You really are a spectacular," Richard, Valerie said, her voice smooth and chillingly calm. "You honestly think you can threaten a trillion-dollar financial institution with a cheap tabloid smear campaign? You have absolutely no idea how the real world operates." Richard stared at the paper, the fake confidence faltering on his face. Valerie tapped the document with her manicured fingernail. "When you liquidated your remaining retirement assets to pay your country club, bail and property damages, you exposed your entire financial underbelly," Valerie explained methodically. "You took out high-interest bridge loans against your remaining leveraged properties to cover your immediate debts. You were desperate for cash. You did not read the fine print. Apex Financial just purchased the entirety of your debt portfolio through a subsidiary acquisition." Valerie smiled, a sharp, lethal expression. "We own your mortgages. We own your bridge loans. We own the very shirt on your sweating back. If you breathe a single word of this to the press, if you even look at a reporter, I will personally execute the acceleration clauses on every single loan you possess. I will foreclose on everything you have left by midnight." You will not just be bankrupt, Richard. You will spend your final years sleeping in a damp cardboard box under a highway overpass begging for spare change. You have absolutely zero leverage. You are an insect, and I am holding the magnifying glass. Richard stared at the paper, the color draining completely from his face. His chest heaved as the absolute totality of his defeat washed over him. He was entirely beaten. The illusion of his power, his status, his entire identity had been systematically dismantled and legally acquired by a corporate entity. He had absolutely nothing left to his name. Just as Valerie stood up to leave, Barbara wandered into the cafeteria. She looked disheveled, her hair sticking up in odd angles from her earlier fainting spell at the precinct. She spotted Richard and rushed over, her face twisted in a mask of greedy panic. "Did you get the money?" Barbara demanded loudly, ignoring Valerie and me entirely. "Did you make them pay for Chloe's lawyers? Tell me you got the cash, Richard." Richard looked at his wife, the woman who had demanded luxury and status at the expense of her own daughter for decades. Something inside his broken mind finally and violently snapped. All the rage, the humiliation, the impending homelessness boiled over in a spectacular display of absolute cowardice. He pointed a shaking, furious finger directly at Barbara's face. "This is your fault!" Richard screamed, his voice echoing off the cafeteria walls, causing doctors and nurses to stop and stare in shock. "You did this to us. You are the one who told me to drain Maya's college trust fund. You are the one who forged the signature on those withdrawal documents so Chloe could buy that damn Porsche. You ruined this family, Barbara. It was all your idea to steal from her." Barbara's jaw dropped, her eyes wide with absolute fury at being publicly thrown under the bus by her own husband. She did not try to deny the felony theft. She did not try to save face or maintain her elite composure. She let out a guttural, animalistic shriek and lunged directly across the plastic table. She tackled Richard, sending them both crashing to the hard cafeteria floor in a tangle of flailing limbs. They began a vicious, screaming fistfight, punching and clawing at each other amidst the scattered chairs. Richard grabbed her hair while Barbara clawed violently at his eyes. They rolled into a discarded tray of hospital food, slipping and sliding in mashed potatoes and spilled coffee, tearing at each other's clothes like feral animals, while the entire hospital staff watched the complete and utter destruction of the Wilson family. Hospital security guards swarmed the cafeteria, physically dragging my screaming, food-covered parents apart. Barbara had a fistful of Richard's hair while Richard was shouting obscenities with a bloody nose. Valerie simply adjusted the belt of her pristine trench coat, gave me a curt nod, and walked out of the sliding glass hospital doors. The Wilson family empire was officially reduced to a pathetic public spectacle on a linoleum floor. I turned my back on the chaos and walked away, assuming the war was finally over and the authorities would handle the rest. I deeply underestimated the sheer cockroach-like survival instinct of a cornered white-collar criminal. 3 days later, my phone vibrated with an urgent alert from my private investigator. Marcus was not going to federal prison. In fact, Marcus was about to disappear entirely. Despite sitting in a maximum security holding cell, my brother-in-law had managed to leverage his law firm's deeply corrupt connections. The federal prosecutors did not care about a mid-level money launderer or a petty family feud over stolen trust funds. They wanted the Cayman Island cartel bosses Marcus had been exclusively servicing for the past 4 years. Marcus had offered the Department of Justice a silver platter of offshore account numbers, routing sequences, and encrypted ledgers. In exchange, the government handed him the holy grail of criminal defense. He was granted a full ironclad plea agreement. He was receiving total immunity from all prosecution. Furthermore, because testifying against a cartel carried an obvious death sentence, Marcus and his pregnant wife Chloe were immediately approved for the Federal Witness Protection Program. The moment the ink dried on the judge's signature, they would be quietly relocated, given brand new identities, and completely absolved of all their financial crimes. Even Chloe's pending vehicular assault charges for trying to run me down in the parking garage were being swept under the massive federal rug. The government considered her an essential dependent of a star witness and refused to let local police interfere. They were going to walk away completely clean. No jail time, no restitution. Just a fresh start fully funded by the American taxpayer. I sat in my Apex Financial corner office, staring at the encrypted case file my investigator had forwarded. My blood ran completely cold. They had tried to frame me for grand larceny. They had physically invaded my home. Chloe had intentionally accelerated a sports car at my head. And now they were going to get a government-sponsored vacation and a brand new life. I slammed my fist onto my mahogany desk. I absolutely refused to accept that outcome. I routed a secure encrypted call to Valerie's top corporate fixer. I needed the exact unredacted text of Marcus's federal immunity agreement. It cost Apex Financial a minor fortune in untraceable consulting fees to acquire the leaked document, but within 2 hours, the 70-page PDF was sitting securely on my primary monitor. I locked my office door, poured a black coffee, and began tearing through the dense legal jargon line by excruciating line. There is always a back door. Federal prosecutors are ruthless, but they are also deeply bureaucratic. They always build a failsafe into their contracts to protect the government. I found it buried on page 42 under the Standard Stipulations Clause. The immunity agreement was strictly conditional. The exact wording stated that the defendant's immunity is instantly rendered null and void if the defendant commits, orchestrates, or facilitates any new state or federal felony from the moment the initial proffer is drafted. If Marcus broke the law while his deal was being finalized, the government would rip up his immunity ticket, take his cartel evidence anyway, and throw him directly into a maximum security cell. I needed a new felony. I needed something Marcus had actively executed within the last 48 hours. I pulled up the comprehensive timeline of my family's attacks, tracing every single fraudulent wire transfer, every fake charity document, and every lie. My eyes stopped dead on the timeline of the apartment invasion. When Richard and Barbara broke into my penthouse, they had proudly brandished a forged lease agreement to the building management. They used that document to bypass the security desk and illegally occupy my property. But Richard did not draft that lease. He was far too incompetent for legal paperwork. Marcus had drafted it. Marcus had used his law firm's official credentials to create a fraudulent notarized property contract to facilitate a felony breaking and entering. But merely drafting a fake document was not enough to trigger the federal trap. It had to be officially processed. I rapidly logged into the state real estate registry portal, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. When a corporate law firm drafts a residential lease of that magnitude, their automated paralegal software routinely files a digital copy to the Federal Housing Database for tax verification purposes. I typed in the address of my penthouse and ran a targeted search for any recent lease attachments. The search wheel spun for 3 agonizing seconds before a bright green confirmation box popped onto my screen. There was a new lease filed under my address. The primary agent listed was Marcus's law firm. I checked the digital timestamp of the official filing. It had been uploaded to the federal server exactly 14 hours ago. Marcus's automated office system had processed the forged document a full day after he signed his federal proffer. Filing a forged legal document across state lines into a federal database constitutes severe wire fraud. It was brand new, indisputable federal felony. Marcus had just broken his own immunity agreement without even realizing it. I stared at the glowing timestamp on my monitor, a slow, razor-sharp smile spreading across my face. I had the exact leverage I needed to destroy his entire escape plan. I printed the Federal Housing Database logs, the undeniable digital timestamps, and the forged lease agreement directly from my secure terminal. I slipped the thick stack of damning evidence into a sleek black leather portfolio. I checked my platinum wristwatch. It was exactly 9 in the morning. Marcus was scheduled to sign his final immunity proffer at 10 o'clock sharp at the Federal District Courthouse. I had exactly 1 hour to completely obliterate his life. I strode out of the Apex Financial building and slipped into the back of my waiting town car. The drive across the city was smooth and silent. I watched the city skyline pass by, feeling an absolute chilling sense of purpose. My family had spent my entire life trying to tear me down, steal my assets, and prioritize their golden child. Today I was bringing the entire rotten structure down on their heads. I walked through the towering marble columns of the federal courthouse, the sharp click of my heels echoing off the polished stone floors. I bypassed the main directory entirely. My corporate fixers had already provided me with the exact location. Conference room 4B on the restricted third floor. I cleared the security checkpoint, flashed my Apex corporate credentials to the bailiff, and pushed open the heavy oak doors without bothering to knock. Marcus was sitting at a massive mahogany table, looking infuriatingly smug in his Orange County Jail jumpsuit. He was flanked by his two overpriced defense attorneys. Across from him sat Assistant United States Attorney Sterling, a woman known for her absolute ruthlessness in cartel prosecutions. The official immunity agreement sat in the center of the table, a shiny silver pen resting right beside it. Marcus was literally reaching for the pen when I walked in. His smug expression instantly vanished, replaced by a furious scowl. "What is she doing here?" he snapped, glaring at the federal marshals stationed by the door. "Get her out." AUSA Sterling looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you and how did you get in here?" "I am Maya Wilson," I stated calmly, walking directly up to the mahogany table. "I am the owner of the penthouse that this man used a forged document to illegally occupy, and I am here to save the Department of Justice from making a catastrophic mistake." I opened my leather portfolio and slid the stack of documents directly across the polished wood until it hit Sterling's hands. "I understand this defendant is receiving blanket immunity contingent on the standard stipulation that he commits no further state or federal felonies during the proffer period," I said, my voice perfectly level. "That immunity clause is void." Exactly 14 hours ago, Marcus's law firm electronically filed a forged residential lease agreement across state lines into a federal housing database. That constitutes premeditated wire fraud. He committed a new federal felony while sitting in a holding cell. Sterling frowned and picked up the documents. The room fell into a suffocating silence as her eyes rapidly scanned the digital timestamps, the IP address logs, and the blatantly forged signature on the lease. Marcus turned a sickly shade of gray. He lunged forward, straining against his handcuffs, trying to see the papers. "That is a clerical error," Marcus stammered, his voice pitching up in raw panic. "My paralegal filed that automatically. I had nothing to do with it. Richard gave me those documents." Sterling did not even look at him. She stared at the undeniable, irrefutable proof of a federal crime time-stamped right in the middle of her pristine immunity negotiations. She hated being played, and Marcus had just made a fool of the Department of Justice. "The deal is completely off," Sterling said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "No, wait!" Marcus pleaded, violently thrashing against his chair. "You cannot do this. The cartel knows I was talking to you. If I go to general population, I am a dead man. You have to protect me." Sterling slowly picked up the 7-page immunity agreement. With a swift, brutal, and incredibly satisfying motion, she ripped the thick stack of papers completely in half and let the pieces flutter onto the mahogany table. "Process him for wire fraud and transfer him to the maximum security federal penitentiary," Sterling ordered the marshals. "We are done here." Marcus unleashed a feral, screaming wail as the federal marshals grabbed him by the arms and violently hauled him out of the chair. He kicked and thrashed completely, losing his mind, sobbing that he was a dead man as they dragged him out the back door of the conference room. I did not blink. I simply closed my empty leather portfolio and walked out into the main marble hallway. Richard and Barbara were waiting right outside the heavy oak doors. They were practically vibrating with eager anticipation, fully expecting Marcus to walk out a free man and whisk them away into federal witness protection. Instead, they watched through the glass partition as Marcus was dragged away in chains, screaming for his life. Sterling walked out directly behind me and stopped in front of my parents. "Your son-in-law just lost his immunity deal," she informed them coldly. "And since his newly discovered wire fraud involves documents you physically used to enter a property, you are both now official targets of a federal investigation. Do not leave the state." The realization hit Richard and Barbara with the force of an actual physical blow. The absolute totality of their situation crashed down upon them. They were entirely bankrupt. Their daughter Chloe was facing years in prison for vehicular assault. Their son-in-law was marked for death by a cartel. And now the federal government was actively hunting them for fraud. They had no money, no home, and no escape. The sheer terror shattered whatever fragile remaining shreds of pride they possessed. Right there in the echoing public hallway of the federal courthouse, my parents physically collapsed. Barbara hit the cold marble floor, landing heavily on her knees. Richard dropped down right beside her, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. They crawled toward me, their hands desperately reaching out to grab the hem of my designer trousers. Maya, please, Barbara sobbed hysterically, mascara running down her face in thick black rivers. We are so sorry. We were wrong about everything. Chloe manipulated us. Marcus lied to us. We were just confused. We have absolutely nothing. Richard wept openly, crawling on his hands and knees like a beaten dog. The cartel is going to kill us to tie up Marcus's loose ends. The feds are going to lock us away. You are our only true daughter, Maya. You are the only one who ever made us proud. Please, you have the money. Just buy us a plane ticket. Buy us a flight anywhere safe. We will never bother you again. Just let us live. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the two pathetic weeping creatures groveling at my feet. For my entire life they had treated me like disposable garbage. They had celebrated my sister's cruelty. They had stolen my hard-earned money, and they had tried to send me to prison. Now they were literally kissing my shoes, begging for their pathetic lives. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, pure triumph. I slowly reached into the interior breast pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a thick, crisp white envelope and looked down at their desperate, tear-stained faces. I anticipated this. I said, my voice soft and completely devoid of emotion. I opened the envelope and pulled out two premium first-class boarding passes. I held them out. They are for a direct flight leaving in 2 hours to a sovereign nation with absolutely no extradition treaty to the United States, I explained. Richard and Barbara snatched the tickets from my hand, sobbing with such intense, pathetic gratitude that they began openly kissing my knuckles. They praised my mercy. They wept about how much they loved me, and they scrambled frantically to their feet, running wildly down the marble hallway toward the exit to catch their flight. They vanished through the revolving glass doors, completely unaware of the lethal trap I had just handed them. Richard and Barbara made it to the international terminal with exactly 40 minutes to spare. They practically shoved their way to the front of the priority boarding line, waving the premium first-class tickets like golden shields against the consequences of their own actions. Once safely inside the luxurious cabin of the massive commercial airliner, their sheer terror immediately morphed back into their trademark sickening arrogance. As the plane climbed above the clouds, Barbara eagerly accepted a crystal flute of complimentary champagne from the flight attendant. She leaned her seat back into a full recline and let out a breathless laugh of pure relief. Richard loosened his silk tie and grinned, staring out the window at the shrinking city below. Within minutes, they were already rewriting the entire narrative. They completely ignored the fact that they had just been groveling on a dirty courthouse floor. Instead, they convinced themselves that they had masterfully manipulated me into funding their lavish early retirement. She always was incredibly weak, Richard scoffed, taking a large sip of aged scotch. All it took was a few tears and a little begging. She is desperate for our approval. She practically handed us a paid vacation. Barbara smiled, a tight, vicious smirk. We will lay low in the tropics for a year or two, let the cartel handle Marcus, and let the federal heat die down. Then we can access the hidden offshore accounts and start over. I always knew Maya was good for something. They clinked their glasses together, celebrating their brilliant escape. They were so blinded by their own greed and so utterly convinced of my inherent inferiority that they never bothered to look closely at the actual flight itinerary. They simply saw a first-class ticket to a tropical non-extradition paradise and ran blindly toward it. 3 hours later, the heavy landing gear locked into place and the commercial jet touched down smoothly on the tarmac. Richard and Barbara gathered their designer carry-on bags, feeling entirely victorious. They strutted down the carpeted aisle of the first-class cabin, fully prepared to step out into balmy tropical air and begin their new life of consequence-free luxury. They stepped out of the aircraft door and walked directly onto the enclosed jet bridge. The air was not tropical. It was heavily air-conditioned and smelled of industrial floor cleaner. Waiting at the exact end of the jet bridge, blocking the exit to the terminal, was a wall of stern, unsmiling men and women. They wore dark navy windbreakers with bright yellow letters printed boldly across the chest. FBI. Welcome to Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the lead special agent stated, his voice echoing harshly in the confined space. Richard and Barbara Wilson, you are under federal arrest. My parents froze, completely paralyzed by sudden catastrophic shock. The color instantly drained from Barbara's perfectly contoured face. Richard dropped his designer leather duffel bag, letting it hit the ground with a heavy thud. There is a mistake, Barbara shrieked, her voice pitching up into a hysterical panic. We are flying international. We are leaving the country. We are not supposed to be in Chicago. You had a mandatory 2-hour domestic layover, the agent replied coldly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. And you just landed in a federal jurisdiction where we hold active felony warrants for your immediate detention. Turn around and place your hands behind your backs. The absolute genius of the trap finally dawned on them. I had not bought them a direct flight to freedom. I had intentionally booked a route with a domestic layover, funneling them straight into the waiting arms of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I had actively tipped off the authorities the second my parents snatched the tickets from my hands. I used their desperation to orchestrate their own flawless capture. First-class passengers stared in absolute shock as Richard and Barbara were violently shoved against the corrugated metal wall of the jet bridge. The cold steel cuffs ratcheted tightly around their wrists. Barbara wailed uncontrollably, screaming my name like a curse, while Richard sobbed openly, begging the federal agents for a phone call. They were dragged away through the crowded terminal, a pathetic public spectacle, stripped of their money, their dignity, and their freedom. The resolution of this Wilson family was absolute and completely permanent. The toxic dynasty was systematically dismantled and buried under a mountain of federal and state indictments. Marcus was officially disbarred, his prestigious law license permanently revoked. Without his federal immunity, he was thrown into a maximum security penitentiary, facing decades for wire fraud and money laundering. He spent every waking moment terrified, looking over his shoulder for the cartel hitmen he had tried to betray. Chloe's reign of terror ended in a sterile, heavily guarded state facility. She was sentenced to 8 years for felony vehicular assault and filing false police reports. She gave birth to her child while in state custody, instantly losing all parental rights to the foster care system. There were no organic juices, no private suites, and no manipulation tactics that could save her from the harsh reality of a concrete cell. Richard and Barbara lost absolutely everything. Apex Financial legally seized every remaining asset they possessed, liquidating their properties to cover the massive debts. Facing irrefutable evidence of charity fraud, grand larceny, and attempting to flee federal jurisdiction, they were sentenced to consecutive 15-year terms in federal prison. They would spend the rest of their natural lives wearing standard-issue jumpsuits, entirely forgotten by the high society they had worshipped. 1 month later, I walked through the towering glass doors of Apex Financial. The atmosphere in the executive suite crackled with electric anticipation. Valerie stood at the head of the massive mahogany boardroom table, looking sharp, lethal, and entirely satisfied. The entire board of directors sat in silence, waiting for her address. Maya Wilson has proven that she possesses the ruthless strategic execution required to lead this firm, Valerie announced, her voice ringing with absolute authority. She eliminated a massive liability, protected our corporate interests, and demonstrated a level of calculated brilliance that I rarely see. Effective immediately, Maya is the new managing partner of Apex Financial. The boardroom erupted into applause. I gave a curt professional nod, accepting the mantle of power I had rightfully earned. I walked out of the boardroom and stepped into my new corner office. The space was massive, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass that offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the towering modern skyline. I stood by the window, adjusting the cuffs of my perfectly tailored, custom-made charcoal blazer. The sunlight caught the subtle gold threading in the fabric. I looked out over the sprawling city, feeling the immense absolute weight of my total victory. I had not just survived my family, I had conquered them. I turned away from the window and looked directly into the camera, my expression unyielding and cold. Family is supposed to be your safety net, not your executioner. Don't ever be afraid to cut the cancer out, even if it shares your blood. The story of Maya's triumph over her toxic family, teaches a profound lesson: blood does not obligate you to endure abuse. For years, her relatives exploited her, masking their deep cruelty behind the illusion of familial duty. The critical realization is that true strength lies in severing ties with those who actively seek your destruction. Maya didn't just survive their relentless betrayals, she strategically reclaimed her power and completely dismantled their web of deceit. We must all learn to set unbreakable boundaries and ruthlessly protect our peace. Share your own experiences of setting boundaries with toxic relatives and comment below.